do. Brainstorm.
That's something we can change on the archive?
Give me a second.
Okay.
I can tell you.
I got my left hand here, so,
All right, now,
We're good?
yeah.
Excellent. We're live?
Yep.
All right. Do I need a new link?
yes, yesterday.
Yes. All right,
6 minutes left in the game, and I'll call it.
let me get to it.
Yeah, I'm here at the sideline, and then like capture the
All right. I'll be back as soon as I get the link going, I'll be right back.
turn around and say, oh my God, I'm on the wrong game, right? Yeah. The game that obviously, the game that both parents, this thing is just the game. I see it.
All right, I'll see you. Yep.
Okay.
You want to get your laptop up, right?
Yeah. People normally speak with a mask on, or how do they do it?
I think it's whatever you feel more comfortable with.
Okay.
Everything's on our side, so you guys just wait and people to come.
All right, sounds good. How's the audio?
Good. Sounds good.
Oh, okay.
What time is the reading?
Supposed to be 11.
11. Oh, okay. Let me check mine.
That's very cool.
Okay, we just posted the new link for the live stream.
Okay,
So we are on Facebook and Twitter.
okay, cool. When does the green light turn on? I mean, like the video or?
It's on.
Oh, so
We're
they can see me
live.
right now?
We're live.
Okay.
We're live. This is it.
And they see this?
Yes,
Online?
yes.
Okay.
The whole thing is being captured right here. Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Maybe we'll get some warm bodies in here too. That would be good, huh? And then next week it'll go on our YouTube channel as archived so that anyone can access
That's cool.
any of the programming.
Yeah.
So that's very cool. And here
They're
it is.
coming.
We're coming, I know.
I know.
We're live streaming, by the way, so we can't swear.
Hi, Mayor. How
Oh,
are
we're doing
you?
it right now.
Right now, we are live.
Hi, Dee, how are you?
I'm
I've never
good,
met you in
Judy. I
person.
know, I haven't, just heard the rumors. How are you?
Good.
Table looks good. Turned out really
Everything
nice.
looks good, and people are starting to pop in there, so it's
Yeah.
all,
It's a long day and some kids are sports, so. Never seen you've met Matt, I don't know, before, even so hi.
Hi, how are you?
Florida. I'm gonna go on this
we'll
side.
give this 1 or 2 minutes,
Yes.
and then we will, like I said, we're live now.
Okay. So, Mr. Hunt, how are you?
Hi there.
Good.
Should I give the microphone?
No, we're all gonna do right here.
Your
Okay.
son is
Stand right in front.
my door.
It's reversed there,
Corey.
because
Oh,
it's
yes,
reversed,
of course.
Yeah.
Val fixed it.
I was in the AV club in high school. I'm a certified
I'm
nerd.
like, wait,
All right.
like, and then I realized you were talking about your son.
Got a lot of experience across a lot of things.
And I was a library monitor too, so.
Very, oh
Yeah.
boy, you've got this all.
I used to have the Dewey Decimal System
Come on in,
memorized.
guys.
Don't ask me to do it today.
Yeah.
Don't know what.
Hi, everyone. Yeah. Matt, why don't you switch to
Well, I'm supposed to kick off Matt. Matt should be.
You're supposed, I'm kicking you off, and then you kick off that.
So let's kick Matt out of it.
He's hogging up all the space
I
now.
take a big kick.
When you have the hair that beautiful, you should show it as much as possible.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt, here, just step aside. Here we are. Thank you all for coming to our wonderful Bat-apalooza. I am here to introduce someone who probably does not need an introduction, but this is our mayor, Mr. Soriano, who has been supremely supportive of all the efforts of the Green Team. He recognizes the importance of protecting our environment and the quality of life. He has taken a bold step and committed to the Sustainable Jersey Gold Pledge in energy for Parsippany. He is also a bat lover, and he attended the first bat walk. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you our mayor, Mr. Soriano.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here for Bat-apalooza, and thank you to the Green Team and the Parsippany Public Library for putting this together. So, sustainability and a goal towards carbon neutrality by the year 2030 here in Parsippany. Now, when the Green Team came to me and you know, Matt Cavanaugh and Judy Hernandez came to me about doing this, I was a little skeptical, and I can't even talk properly with that. But I was like, I was at a loss for words. I was like, do you really think we can pull that off? And Matt assured me that we could. And this is something I always wanted to do, but I always worried that the people around me wouldn't want to help support it. I always felt like that I might be alone. The Green Team has done a fabulous job at spearheading this. getting us on a path of sustainability here in New Jersey. And really, as of last week, we are now in Parsippany, now bronze certification for sustainable New Jersey, on a path to gold. This is an ambitious goal, and it is a great thing to do. It's no longer a conversation about that climate change is going to happen. We are in the midst of it happening right now. The bat population dying out is certainly a symbol of it. The weather events that we've had lately are showing that we are in the midst of it right now. So it is time for action. So I've learned if anyone that can meet these goals, it's the green team pushing this forward. This is a team that is nonpartisan. It is neither red or blue. As we said, it is green. Okay, and not only that, as it turns out, when you do things green, you actually save yourself some green also. It is the right thing to do for several reasons. So working together, we're making great strides here for reducing our energy costs and protecting our natural resources and reducing waste, which is very important to me as well. So I'm proud that Parsippany has become a leader in sustainability in our area, and I'm hoping that we encourage and inspire others to do that. And with that said, I would like to introduce Matt Cavanaugh from our green team. Matt.
All right, hi everybody, welcome. This is the Bat-apalooza, which is a very creative word for what we've created today and the Parsippany Green Team. So happy to be here. Thank you for being here. What I'm going to present on is the path to gold and what that means for Parsippany. How do we get there? Where are we now? And essentially explain sustainable Jersey a little bit more. So we're hoping at the end of this, everyone is a little bit more informed about what's going on. They might want to join the team and participate. And, you know, we built a group of people that are interested in sustainability across Parsippany. And as the mayor said, this is definitely something that's needed, and we need to act now on these types of things. So the Parsippany Green Team, the mission, it's a municipal citizen team, and we are crafted with pursuing Sustainable Jersey certification. Sustainable Jersey is a nonprofit, and there's over 400 towns in New Jersey that participate at some level. It's a points-based system, meaning that there's 400 plus actions, and each action, when certified, awards a certain number of points towards the town. So as the mayor said, we have earned bronze as of last week, and that was our goal for 2021. Thank you. So Judy Hernandez and myself have been leading the team since 2019. It's been a long journey, but we accomplished this goal. And sustainability is crosses many boundaries in the community: people, planet, environment, and also animals and creatures and our natural resources. So the way that Sustainable Jersey program works is that you need to get points across multiple sectors or categories of the program. And for bronze, you need 150 points, 2 priority actions that they consider the most important actions to get points, and the total should be 150. We happen to get 190 points, and this certification will last for 3 years. However, we're not stopping there. Next year, we want to add on an additional 200 points to get silver, which is the next certification level. And there's even fewer towns that have that credential. And then finally, there's a new standard, a gold star certification in energy. And this specific goal, there's only 1 town in New Jersey that has this. So we're trying to get there. It's a big, lofty goal, and there's a lot of requirements. But 2023 is what we're shooting for with this goal. And, you know, starting with bronze this year enables us to get to these other goals. And I'll explain the gold certification. So I mentioned sustainability is a broad spectrum of categories. These 18 categories are how Sustainable Jersey groups all of the activities together. So you can see there's lots of different things that are involved across the town, from animals, brownfields, food, health and wellness, energy, local economies, waste management, water management. And I guarantee you there's something for everybody. So if you have an interest and you want to join the team and you see something that appeals to you, or you have an expertise in something, we want you to join us on this journey. So, but sustainability is about protecting the town in all aspects, so we're well-rounded. And Parsippany has already demonstrated through getting bronze and the things that we've done historically that we are a very sustainable town, and going forward, we want to make it even more so. So the Green Team, I just want to talk about the Green Team. We have bi-weekly meetings, and we organize ourselves in a couple different social media formats. We have shared notes, shared documents, a monthly municipal meeting to align with the municipal staff and the department heads. And we do this over Zoom. So this kind of kicked off right before the pandemic. So we were Zoom 100% up until a few months ago. And we actually had our first in-person meeting a little while ago. But the idea is that, you know, if you don't have to drive to a meeting, you're saving carbon right there, which is good. And we can capture more people, and we intend on keeping it on Zoom in terms of our regular cadence, so we can participate with more people, and obviously the carbon footprint. So, and we project manage with a software called Monday.com. So I mentioned there's 400 actions, and I'm sorry, there's 400 actions, 150 actions, and each one is lots of different requirements. So we try to stay organized and keep real life status on an online version of a project management system. So progress so far, I want to share what we've been working on and exactly what we got awarded in this last round to get bronze. So this is a sustainability credential for the town. It means that Parsippany is at the heart of sustainability. It means that we care about it, and it means that we have a qualifications at this point in comparison to other towns that designates us as bronze. And we got 190 points across all of these actions, which were certified and complete. And we join a short list of towns that have bronze. And the activities and the actions that we pursued included things across these categories that you see, the colorful categories in the middle: partnerships, emergency management, food, health and wellness, energy, natural resources, waste, and public engagement. So public engagement, you might think that's kind of funny, but essentially that's about making sure that sustainably the broadest spectrum of people in the town, and the diversity of the town, is included in decisions, included in what happens in the town at a local government level. So public information and engagement is very important, and we got a couple points there. So leading the way, though, was waste management. And Parsippany has actually a very good waste management system. We have a strong recycling depot. We recycle and dispose of things that we don't even need to based on regulations. We have outreach and do a lot of things to communicate how to recycle, what to do with waste. You know, a grass cut it and leave it program, which is one of the things that we got, helps with sustainability. And we happen to get more points in waste than any other category, even though we've been focusing a lot on energy. And, you know, that's a credit to the town and all the good stuff that they're doing already. So path to gold, let's talk about that. The gold certification is targeted towards energy, and it's focused exclusively on carbon reduction. So I don't need to get into all the details of global climate change, but I think we know what's going on, and reducing our carbon footprint across our heating, cooling, electricity, and our transportation is going to be very important. And Sustainable Jersey also thinks that's so. So the actions that get you to gold span across municipality and span across the community. and you have to do certain things that have the highest impact on the community's carbon footprint to get certified as in gold. And it takes 3 years to get there. So some of the key actions include energy efficiency for municipal buildings, which we're working on, energy tracking and management. You need to know where you start with your energy usage to figure out what your carbon footprint is and where you can improve. So starting with tracking, in 2019, there was an intern that came here and diligently pulled bills out and looked at everything and put everything in a spreadsheet and got us started on this path of energy conservation. So tracking it is vital, it's very important. And then obviously you can buy electricity from a renewable energy source. You can aggregate and purchase electricity, clean electricity in bulk as a town. And continuous outreach to the commercial and residential space is important because people can learn about how they can conserve energy, how they can cut their carbon footprint, what programs and incentives are available to do so, and how do you do that economically with whatever budget you have. So commercial and residential energy outreach is very important. Distributed generation or renewable energy is one of the pillars of this program, which includes on-site solar photovoltaic, geothermal. There's aspects of wind, there's aspects of electric vehicles, and all of these things impact the carbon footprint. So they're in there and they're embedded and they're part of how you get to gold. And then making everything friendly for these new technologies like electric vehicle charging or cleaner, smoother ordinances for solar or any of the things that we want to install. Working with the town municipal government to make things easier to implement in the town is an important feature here. So making our town friendly to these technologies is also in there. So there's a lot of detail here, but it gets a little bit more into how Sustainable Jersey thinks about the impact of each one of these actions on the carbon footprint. Municipal activities can cut carbon footprint by 30 to 75%. We want to get to 100% or net 100%. And looking at all aspects of how to do that. On a community-wide basis, there are available incentives and options now that can cut our town carbon footprint. So this is commercial buildings, residence, homes by 19 to 33%. And we all have to work together to get there. And there's a lot of steps that we need to take, but essentially this is a roadmap for us. And the criteria for gold means that the municipality demonstrates that we reduce our carbon footprint by at least 3.3% per year. And over the 3-year period, that totals up to 10.8%. So this goes back to tracking and management, where we need to know where we start and then diligently track it so that we can prove that our carbon footprint is reduced. At a community-wide level, it's very hard to track all the carbon footprint of the community. There's a lot of moving pieces. These are private residences or private commercial buildings. So they do that a little bit differently, where they have core activities, as I mentioned in the first slide, core activities in the program that must be checked off and finished community-wide so that you can get points on the community. Understanding and knowing that when you do these activities, the carbon footprint of the community comes down naturally, right? So some of those include alternate fuel and public charging stations and infrastructure in the town, solar incentives for the town so that more homes can more effectively and faster and in a faster way install solar panels. There's incentives for low-hanging fruit things that you can do, like changing out your LED light bulbs, installing smart thermostats, turning down your heat, turning down your air conditioning. Do I need to have this light or this machine running or whatever that is in your house or your business or your commercial building? And looking at those on what exists, just reducing demand in general before offsetting any carbon. So everything is sized to how much carbon we're using, how much energy we're using. So in the very beginning, if you can be more efficient, and you can integrate some of the easier things first that are accessible to everybody, then you can have an impact on your personal lives, on businesses, and then obviously at a municipal level and a community level. So where are we now? We've done some rough math, and this is kind of where we stand as a community right now. The municipality consumes 9.5 million kilowatt hours of energy a year, and over 160,000 therms of energy, natural gas. These are burned across the 14 buildings and facilities in the municipality. And 50% of this energy actually comes from the sewer plant, which is vital infrastructure to the town. It serves other towns as well. And I'll get into what we're doing about that as well with the carbon footprint. But there's money spent here every month paying bills to utilities, and there's money to be saved as well through programs, incentives, and renewable energy features across all these facilities. And then community-wide, 200 million kilowatt hours. So this is basing it on an average home consumption times 22,000 homes in Parsippany, average thermal consumption of natural gas times 22,000 homes, plus apartments and other tenants and condos. So that is 130,000 metric tons of carbon per year just for the electric that we consume, and 33 million therms of natural gas is burned. And this in fact is the largest contributing factor to greenhouse gas emissions and the carbon footprint, which is burning of the natural gas. That's 500,000 metric tons of carbon going into the atmosphere every year. And then personal transportation and corporate transportation, we think it's around 14 million gallons or another 130,000 metric tons. So overall, as a community, 900,000 metric tons a year greenhouse gas emissions go into the atmosphere, not to mention all the cars that drive through our community that are putting additional pollutants in the air. So the question is, well, what do you do about that, right? How do we solve that problem? And I'll get into the details here. So how to get the gold, right? We talked about energy efficiency. We talked about renewable features, energy reduction at the gross and aggregate level. And some of the solutions that are part of the aspect of getting to gold and lowering carbon footprint include what you see on this screen here. So solar photovoltaic systems that you can install on parking lots, on rooftops, on homes, or in a grassy field or an open space that can generate electricity in the town, on our properties, on our roofs, and we don't need to draw that energy from the grid. And that is 100% carbon savings per kilowatt hour. It's directly from the sun, it's energy, you have access to it. And not every condition or person is okay for solar. You obviously need sunlight, and we have a lot of trees, but there are programs where we can take advantage of commercial spaces and the community spaces to generate more solar energy. Ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps. So there's technology now where you can drill into the ground and pull heat out of the ground year round, or push the air conditioning heat back into the ground. And it becomes a solution to not use natural gas. So you can heat and cool your house with the ground underneath your property. I have one installed in my house, and it's been an entire year, and it's been perfect. And this is a way for solving one of the harder components, which is the heating needs in our region. And air source heat pumps are a version of that, where you're essentially doing heating and cooling from the air. And the benefit of that is, once you're using electricity to heat your house through an air source heat pump, then you can buy clean energy, or you can size a solar system appropriately to knock down that carbon footprint. So electrifying everything is actually a very good thing, because then you have the advantage of taking advantage of other renewable energy sources. And then additionally, we talk about energy efficiency, LED bulbs, better pumps, better drives, lowering the energy consumption at the source of what we actually use on a daily basis. I mentioned a smart thermostat. That does some of the thinking for you. It'll raise and lower the temperature of your house based on when you're there, when you're not there, and kind of do all of that stuff for you so that you can lower your carbon footprint and lower gross energy consumption in your home or your building. And then electric vehicles is this other piece of the puzzle. So we have our buildings, we have our natural gas that we're burning, we have the electricity that we're pulling from the grid, which is largely created by natural gas power plants in Parsippany. But then you have transportation. How do you get around in a carbon-free world also? And Parsippany is an interesting place. We are at the nexus of many different roads and highways. We're right in the middle. And the beauty about that is we can become a leader in the space of electric vehicle charging at the commercial level for passenger vehicles by setting up and enabling charging infrastructure in our in our town that draws in that investment, that creates charging solutions for people that are driving through our town and need to take a pit stop, or residents that want charging for their electric vehicles or their hybrid vehicles. So we have talked about this, the fact that Parsippany is in a very good location, actually, to participate in the EV revolution and the transformation of the gasoline and diesel carbon footprint of our town as well. And I was at a conference in Los Angeles recently. They have electric garbage trucks, electric street cleaners, electric trucks, electric vans. Obviously, passenger vehicles can be electrified too. And Parsippany, if you look at this radius, every electric vehicle has a different range, but 250 miles can get you pretty far. And that goes to Boston, all the way down to Washington, D.C. So someone can stop in our town and charge and then be on their way and get to their final destination on a full charge before even stopping again. And it's interesting because we capture all of the many large cities on the East Coast. And again, back to location, it's very important. So there's aspects of sustainable Jersey that are pursued to make this more friendly, to pass resolutions, to pass ordinances that improve and make this easier for our community and commercial buildings. So I talked about the sewer plant, which is 50% of the carbon footprint of the town. Sewer plant is pumping water. It's constantly moving 24 hours a day. It's a huge consumer of electricity and heat. So based on 2019 data, 5.7 million kilowatt hours are consumed by the sewer plant, and almost 20,000 therms of natural gas are burned each year. And if you look at this map, everything blue on this map is a theoretical possibility of where you can put solar on the ground or install carports over impervious concrete or other surfaces. And a 4.6 to 4.9 million watt solar system spread out across these locations or some other location on the sewer plant could take all of that electricity to zero, all of that carbon footprint down to zero, and eliminate the carbon footprint of the sewer plant altogether. And this is a project that we're working on, in fact. It's under the activity of energy efficiency for municipal buildings. That's Sustainable Jersey Action. So you can see within the bounds of this property, within the bounds of this facility, even though it's a huge consumer, even though it draws a lot of energy, the possibility exists there to eliminate the carbon footprint at the source. Likewise, the heating, you can drill, potentially, you could drill geothermal wells to take care of all the therms. And then this massive carbon footprint in the town can be eliminated and drawn to zero over time. And the project that we're pursuing, we actually got a grant to look into feasibility studies and research this to see what is even possible and how do we get there. And we've engaged with energy consultants to figure this out already. But the grant was from Sustainable Jersey and the Gardenier grant, and we greatly thank them for that opportunity. Sustainable Jersey happens to draw a lot of grants that are available to the community, and we continuously apply for those. So great potential here. And then one of the features of the sewer plant is resiliency. energy storage systems, which can store energy for later and keep the plant operational if there's a grid outage or some natural disaster or some natural storm. So as I mentioned, critical infrastructure. So part of the plan is to enable this to stay in operation while the rest of the town might be out in a grid outage. And that's a good thing, right? We want our sewer plant to keep going. So then here you go, main library, right? Carports on the parking lot and a little bit on the rooftop, and a couple geothermal wells would take away the carbon footprint of this building, which consumes almost 450,000 kilowatt hours a year and 13,000 therms. So even here, you can think of shade structures out in the parking lot with minimal installation. There's plenty of sun. It's a beautiful parking lot. Or the roof of this facility, if it can bear the weight and it has enough age left. But essentially, we've done preliminary designs on all 14 of the municipal buildings, and there's space and adequate availability of resources to reduce all the carbon footprints with renewable energy. So it's really exciting. And thank you for the time to present. We can do this together. The mayor mentioned 2030 as a net zero community goal. So the gold certification with Sustainable Jersey is just one milestone in getting there. And then we have another 7-year runway to work together and figure out how to do even more to get to zero, right? So Sustainable Jersey wants us to do certain things and reduce the municipal footprint by 10%. And we want to go even further and get to zero. So that's the goal. So come join us on the journey. I want to recruit, and Judy and I want more people to participate. We want, as I mentioned, it's a broad spectrum of activities, and there's things that we haven't even tapped into. We need people that are interested in those things, that are skilled, that have experience, that can pull that in and grow this initiative across the town. So here's some contact information. We have an email address, parsippanygreenteam@gmail.com. We also, on that website, have a bunch of training videos and other content. You can click on it, you can watch it. This past year, we did 19 videos through this library. Every Thursday, we were recording something new about sustainability, from salting the roads to energy storage systems to plastic bags, many different broad topics, and it's all on the Green Team website. And then Sustainable Jersey Actions, we can share the link to monday.com. It's full visibility of what we're working on across the community and status and who's working on what. It's shared with the municipality, and that project management system gives real live access to the information. And we have a llama farm on monday.com. So it's just this neat feature of the software where every activity that we get changes the color of the llama as we move it through the process, and they kind of just bounce around in real time. So it's pretty fun. And then sustainablejersey.com has all the information you could ever want about these actions. You can download PDFs, you can browse the website, you can look at resources, past training content, and there's a lot of information on there as well. So please come out. Thank you again for having me. That's the end of my presentation, and appreciate being here today.
Need your lavalier mic.
Yep.
Catherine needs that next. All right.
Thank you.
That was fascinating. Well done.
Thank you.
A lot of good stuff going on.
Yeah, I can see that. Amazing.
And that.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff to do.
Lots of
Anywhere
stuff
is
to do.
good.
Meet a lot of people.
Pockets?
Hi, nice to meet you.
As soon as you're plugged in, let me know and we'll do introduction.
Yeah, the reference cell program is moving forward. New boilers, new homeowners, new pumps, so energy efficiency, local bugs that we use. So we're secured funding with your vote for that. That's moving forward. We're in procurement stage and design and procurement.
You're good?
Yep.
All right, if you could just step aside here. We are still live, so everybody at home, this is how it works behind stage. Okay, I am excited to introduce our next guest, Judy Hernandez, who is a real deal when it comes to being passionate about our environment. Just met her today for the first time, despite hearing rumors for all these months. She is the vice chair of the Parsippany Environmental Advisory Committee and the co-leader of the Parsippany Green Team, and also sits on the Parsippany Planning Board. Judy serves on the Parsippany Bat Protection Project Steering Committee and has helped bring us Bat-apalooza and the Green Fair today. Welcome, Judy.
Thanks, Dee. And thank you, Rutgers Wildlife Conservation Management, for being here. So as we saw from Matt's presentation, you could pick so many different subject areas for sustainable Jersey. It's just soup to nuts. And a group wanted to do animals, and they decided on bat protection. So we're like, wow, how do we go about even exploring this? And thank you, Councilwoman McCarthy is also here. She was a big part of this program. So we reached out to Rutgers, and Rutgers did a presentation for us, and then we're like, yes, this is it. This is all things bats all the time is what we wanted to do. And so Rutgers Wildlife Conservation Management actually also did 2 bat walks with us at the Troy Meadows, which is run by Wildlife Preserves, which is pretty amazing. The 2 bat walks were waiting lists only, and we're hoping to do more. And so without further ado, I want to thank Kathleen Kerwin for being here today, and she's going to present to us on bats. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? This is my first in-person talk since pre-COVID, so this is very exciting. Thank you for having me. So now we're going to talk all about bats. I don't mind taking questions throughout the talk, so if you have a question, raise your hand. Otherwise, ask them at the end, and I'll also have my email address as well if you want to shoot me an email with any questions you might have. So first off, we'll talk a little bit about basic bat biology. So all bats from around the world share these characteristics. Bats are mammals, just like us. That means that they have hair or fur. They also have mammary glands, so they breastfeed their young, and they give birth to live young. So they're not giving birth to eggs or anything like that. They're the only mammal capable of truly flying. So you might have heard of a flying squirrel, but and we do have those in New Jersey, but they don't actually fly. They just have a piece of skin that runs down their body, and they'll get to a high point, like up a tree, and then glide. They'll jump off and glide to another spot. So they're not actually flying. Bats are actually flying. There's a lot of bats around the world. We have over 1,300 species worldwide. Just to put that in perspective, that's 1/5 of all mammal species. The only other group of mammals that has more species than that are the rodents. A lot of that diversity exists along the tropics. So we only have 47 species in the United States, and 9 of those live in New Jersey. This is our biggest bat in the whole world. Don't worry, they're not in New Jersey. They have a 5.5-foot wingspan. They live in the Philippines, and they eat fruit. But this is a great photograph to kind of show the anatomy of a bat. So the taxonomic order, the Latin name for the group that includes bats is called Chiroptera, which literally translates into hand wing. So bats evolved flight much differently than birds. If you think of a bird and its feathers, those primary, secondary feathers that form its wing, they're coming off of its arm bone. And when they flap their wings, that's how they generate flight. Their finger bones, for the most part, are very fused together. But when you think of a bat, it's almost the exact opposite. Their finger bones have elongated over time. So in this picture, you can see they have their thumb sticking up. They'll use that to climb around when they're actually roosting. They have that pointer finger to just go down the line, middle finger, ring finger, and then pinky finger is that long one on the bottom. There's a very thin membrane of skin between those fingers that attaches to their body, and that's what forms their wing, and that's how they fly. Bats are found throughout the world. They provide a lot of vital ecological functions. So all of our bats in New Jersey eat insects. That's all that they do. They are great at it, and they provide a lot of insect control. We'll talk more about that later. But other bats around the world are important pollinators. We have bats that are seed dispersing, like the picture of the bat I just showed you. That bat is eating fruit in these Philippine forests and pooping out those seeds all over the place, and that's what helps those plants get around. That's that same species again. So our biggest bat in the world just versus our smallest bat in the world. That giant golden mantled flying fox versus the bumblebee bat, which is found in Thailand and weighs less than a penny. Another thing to see or look at these two species, differentiate them. Our flying foxes, our fruit-eating bats, they have a much longer muzzle. They look more dog-like. Some people might think they're cuter. I don't agree necessarily. But our insect-eating bats, which is, the bumblebee bat is an example of that, they have more squished faces because unlike these fruit eaters, which are using their noses a lot to fly around and sniff out for ripe fruit, these insect-eating bats use echolocation. So they're emitting sound, and they have to be able to feel that sound wave hit their face so they can see what's in front of them, essentially. So they have those flatter faces. We'll talk more about that later. Some other bats around the world are the fringe-lip bat. They hunt for frogs. It's kind of a specialty species bat. And then one of our pollinating bats, the lesser long-nosed bat, they feed on agave flowers. This is a cool example of a mutualistic relationship. So in ecology, if we have a mutualistic relationship, that means both species in that relationship are benefiting. In this case, the bat, which has this nice long tongue, it can reach into the flower and get nectar out, which is a really nice high caloric food source for them. They're getting pollen all over their faces. This is an example of that. And so when they get covered in this pollen and then go to the next flower to get more nectar, they're pollinating that flower. Agave plants have actually evolved to only open at night so that only bats are pollinating them. Agave makes tequila, so if you like tequila, you can thank these bats. Bats are arguably one of the most misunderstood groups of animals on Earth. So we'll just go over some of the myths and misconceptions that people have about bats. Can bats suck your blood? Well, not in the United States. Luckily, out of those 1,300 species I talked about, only 3 of them are capable of feeding on blood. They live in Central and South America, and for the most part, they're really only targeting livestock. This is the hairy-legged vampire bat, so just one of those 3 species. And here's an example. So there's actually a bat under that chicken. It's a little hard to see, but it's feeding on that chicken's foot. That chicken has no idea what's happening. This typically happens at night when these animals are in bed, and these bats have very specialized razor-sharp teeth. So when they land on that animal, they'll make a very small incision, and they have anticoagulants in their saliva, which makes the blood flow out really fast. They'll feed for 10 to 20 minutes, and then they'll move on, and the animal didn't even know it happened. So typically, they're just going after livestock. Oops, I'm going to touch the cable. Hopefully it comes back. There's always technical difficulties at some point. Let's try again. Cool. All right. Are bats blind? No, bats actually have pretty good vision, but since they are nocturnal, they have to rely on another sense besides sight and able to perceive their surroundings. So the way they do this is through echolocation. And how this works is they're emitting very high frequency noise waves out in front of them. And it's so high frequency that humans can't hear it. It's way above our range of hearing capabilities. But these noises are very, very loud. So if we could hear it, it would sound like a freight train or a plane going by. These are very, very loud sounds. And in order to prevent the bat from actually damaging its own hearing, it'll close its own ears up as it's emitting these sounds and then opening their ears back up really quick so that they can get that sound back. So when those sound waves are emitted, they're hitting whatever object is in front of them and bouncing back. And then that's the information that the bats use to figure out what's in front of them. It's crazy. Through this method, they can figure out if something is alive or dead, or if it has texture, or what direction it's moving in. It's really amazing. And through this method, they are very efficient nighttime predators of insects. This is a good time to talk about why bats are nocturnal. This is probably because even though they are good at flying, they're not quite as good at flying as birds are. So if they were out during the day, they would probably get outcompeted by bird species that are also going after insects in the sky. Bats also can fall victim to predators such as hawks or owls. So being out at night kind of gives them a little more protection from that. Do all bats carry rabies? No. Only a small percentage of bats actually carry rabies in this state. It's hard to measure that because in order to test for rabies, you actually have to kill the animal and test their brain tissue. But our best guess is that only less than 1% of all bats here actually carry the disease. On average, 2 people die in the United States from contact with a rabid bat. So it's very, very rare, but it does happen occasionally. There's a misconception that when bats get rabies, it makes them very aggressive, like you would think, a dog or a raccoon or something like that. But rabies actually makes bats very sick. So if you did see a bat maybe on the ground out during the day, not able to fly, that doesn't necessarily mean it has rabies, but it's a red flag. You should be really careful. In general, you really should never touch wildlife, but if you have to for some reason, to make sure you're wearing gloves. When we handle bats, we have special leather gloves so that their teeth can't penetrate. The only way to get rabies is to have some sort of contact with that animal. There has to be a bite or a scratch to transfer the virus, which lives in the saliva of the infected animal, into your bloodstream. That's the only way to get rabies. A lot of people might think that even if they're just in the same room with a bat, the bat gets in your living space and it's flying around, that does not count as an exposure. And if you know for sure that that bat did not touch you, you can simply let it out. That gets a little tricky. If you're sleeping, if there's a child in the room, you wouldn't know for sure, and you should be safe than sorry, and get those post-exposure rabies vaccinations as soon as possible because the disease is 100% fatal and it's not worth the risk. So why do we care about bats so much? Well, a lot of it has to do with ecosystem services. When I say ecosystem services, I'm referring to any function that the environment plays that is benefiting humans for free. So anything from pollination to water filtration and purification, anything like that we take for granted that nature is just providing us. So bats are great at eating those bugs, and they are really the only major predator of night flying insects. If we do a little math equation here and pretend that we have a big brown bat colony of 1,000 individuals, and say on average they weigh about 10 grams each one of those bats every single night is eating up to their body weight in insects, especially our lactating females because they have to eat a lot of calories. And that'll equal, for that colony, 22 pounds of insects that are getting removed every single night from the environment. So that's a huge amount. Scientists like to put numbers to these things to figure out how much money we're saving. And a study done in 2011 came up with this figure of $22.9 billion per year that bats are saving the agricultural industry in the US. And this really only accounted for the estimated amount of pesticides that are not purchased and then sprayed because bats have eaten the pest insects that would have caused the damage. So that's a huge number that bats are saving us. All right, any questions so far? Because I'm going to dive into the bats of New Jersey. Yes?
Just a quick one. You said 2 people is it per year that die?
Yes, 2 people per year in the country, on average, die from rabies from a bat. I should also mention, you're more likely to be in contact with a rabid bat, even though every mammal technically can carry rabies. You're less likely to open your bedroom and see a raccoon there. you're more likely to get a bat in your house because they tend to sometimes live in people's houses. And we'll talk more about that later. But people are just more likely to actually handle a bat than they are other wildlife. So in New Jersey, we have 9 species of bats, and we like to separate them into 2 groups. We have our cave bats, and we have our tree bats. This refers to where they spend their winter time. All of these 9 species will use trees during the summer, but during winter, when these bats are hibernating, our cave bats will use caves or old abandoned mines, whereas our tree bats will use trees. So the first 2 up are the little brown and the big brown. These are probably our most known species of bat because they like using people's houses. So you're more likely to be in contact with them. The little brown bat, unfortunately, their populations are way down because of white nose syndrome, and I'll talk more about that later. So we're seeing a lot more big brown bats around the landscape. They're very similar looking to each other, except for size. This is a picture I took in a hibernation spot. Typically, you don't find them hibernating together, but these 2 were. Little browns on the right, big browns on the left. Kind of cute. The other 2 are northern long-eared and Indiana bats. I should mention too, though, a lot of these bats look almost exactly the same to each other. For example, an Indiana bat and a little brown bat, the only way to really tell them apart is you have to hold them and look really closely at their toes. Little browns have very hairy toes for some reason, and Indianas don't. There's also a very small keeled piece of skin on their tail membrane that one of them has and one of them doesn't. They're just extremely similar. Northern long-eareds obviously have long ears, but they also look very similar. One thing to look at is the tragus, which is that flap of skin that we all have too, but it's kind of covering their ear hole. On the northern long-eared, it's very spear-like, so that's something to look out for. But these bats are very similar looking. Our northern long-eareds are federally threatened. They were listed in 2017 due to white nose syndrome, and our Indianas are endangered due to habitat loss, and they've been listed as endangered since the 60s, but they're also affected by white nose syndrome. We also have the eastern small-footed and the tricolored, so these are the last 2 of our cave bats. Eastern small-foots, they have more of a dark mask across their face. That's a distinguishing characteristic. Tricoloreds look the most different just because they have that lighter, more reddish fur color. Moving on to the migratory bats, which are our tree bats. So those 6 cave bats, they don't leave New Jersey. They are here in the summertime and they will hibernate here and spend the winter here. Versus our migratory bats, they decided they didn't want to stay here for the wintertime. They want a little warmer temperatures. So in the case of our silver-haired and our red bats, they will migrate not too far, but a little farther south, and they will hibernate. Our hoary bats, on the other hand, they're our biggest bat. They'll actually go all the way down. They'll migrate down to subtropical regions to spend the wintertime, which is pretty amazing. This is the typical life cycle of a New Jersey bat, and I'm going to start with autumn because that's where we are now. This is an interesting time of year for bats because it's their mating season. So when they're done raising their pups during the summer, they'll get ready for hibernation. They're putting on weight, and they all travel to these sites where they go to hibernate. And in the bat biology world, we call this swarming. The males and females all get together and they mate, but fertilization within the female does not actually occur until spring, which is pretty interesting. When she wakes up in the spring, she then becomes pregnant. During the winter time, there's obviously no insects available, so bats have to either hibernate or migrate, as we talked about. A lot of our species will hibernate in caves and mines. We don't know specific locations where a lot of these guys actually go. Bats are pretty hard to study in general, but we do have some evidence of eastern reds actually burying themselves into leaf litter. I put a yellow circle around. There's a bat actually within those leaves, which is kind of crazy. This is a picture of a little brown bat that we took at Hibernia Mine, which is a spot in New Jersey. It's probably not too far from here, Rockaway. So this is a cool spot. It's actually a pre-Revolutionary War iron mine, and it was operational up into the 70s. And once it got shut down, it almost immediately started attracting bats as a place to hibernate. And it became one of the largest hibernaculum for little brown bats. At one point, there was over 30,000 bats hibernating in here every winter. And these spots are great for scientists and biologists to come in and study bats because they're all congregated in these like spots where you can just walk through and count. You can put bands on bats and catch them in the winter. Just take them right off the wall of the cave, read that band number, and you get all sorts of mark recapture data. You can study populations through time, study their health. So this is a picture of what it looks like inside. It's gated so that people can't go in for people's safety. It's not, you have to have protective equipment to go in there, but also to protect the bats and limit disturbance. Since white nose has hit, this is a spot where we've seen huge declines. So last time biologists were in here, I believe there was maybe close to 300 bats versus the 30,000 that used to be. So it's pretty sad. In the spring and summer, this is the breeding time or the raising of the pups time for these bats. Several of our species will form these colonies. We call them maternity colonies. Males play no part in raising pups. They go off and do bachelor things all summer long. So if you see a single bat or maybe two bats hanging out near your house and then you don't see them again, probably males. They like to jump around all over the place. But the females, some of our species will form these groups. It could be anywhere from a few bats to literally thousands of bats. Here's a picture looking up in the middle into a bat house. Those are big brown bats. You can see how close they like to be to each other. They like it warm because their babies are born naked and blind, and they need warmth to survive. Bats are very slow reproducers. They're only giving birth to one baby every year, which is why something like white nose syndrome is so devastating because it's going to take a long time for these bats to recover. But they're pretty long-lived. They can live 10, 15 years. These babies are born in May or June, and it takes them about a month to learn how to fly. And again, males do male that sort of things. All right, moving on to how we can help bats. First, I'll talk about managing forests, then I'll talk more about bat houses. But all of our bats in North America rely on forests for survival. I did talk about those two species that will use man-made structures, but even those species will use forests. Bats love snags. Snag is a fancy term for a dead or dying tree that's still standing up. And that type of tree, a dead tree, is such great habitat, not just for bats, but all sorts of wildlife. As that tree starts to decay, bugs will move in, woodpeckers, other birds will start eating those bugs and creating cavities. Bats will move into those cavities. Other animals like flying squirrels will move in. They're just basically habitat hotels for all sorts of wildlife. A lot of bats will roost under bark. So it's an Indiana bat under that piece of bark there. As the trees decay, the bark will start to slough off and provide those little nooks and crannies for the bats to move into. Other species, like our red bats, they'll actually roost directly on tree foliage, and they blend in pretty well. We did a study last summer where we put radio transmitters, we glued them to the backs of bats, of red bats, and we tracked them to over 40 roost trees, and we would look up for like 10, 20 minutes with binoculars trying to find each of these bats just to confirm that they were in there. We knew they were there because of the beeping sounds, but we never once actually saw the bat. We knew they were there, but they really blended in. We could not see them. So snags, like I said, provide enormous benefit to bats and a lot of other wildlife species. Bats frequently like bigger snags because of that heat factor. They like it warm when they raise their pups. So bigger trees will be able to retain heat better. They also like snags in those earlier stages of decay because there's more of that peeling bark available. A general rule of thumb, if you're lucky enough to have woods on your property, if you can maintain 3 to 4 snags per acre, that's really, really great. You know, you want to make sure that they're not gonna fall on your house or cause any sort of property damage. But if you have enough space and can have a snag, it's awesome. You can create snags. So if there's a big tree that you want to create into a snag, what you could do is, it's called girdling. It doesn't have to look this pretty, but you can just take an axe and make a ring around the trunk of the tree. That will prevent the tree from being able to transport water or nutrients from the roots to the leaves, because the only real living layer is right under that bark. So if you cut it, the tree will die. Shagbark hickories are an interesting species because they have bark that's already peeling even when they're alive. So this kind of mimics a dead or dying tree with that peely bark. So bats really like it. If you can plant shagbarks or you have shagbarks on your property, you should keep those. General forest management recommendations for bats. If you are harvesting timber, try to keep at least 60% canopy closure. Retain those snags, leave those shagbark hickories in place. Try not to harvest any trees within 300 feet of a stream or a wetland. And try not to fell any trees when bats might be present during that summer period, but especially May, June, July. That's when those pups are learning how to fly. So maybe if you're cutting a tree down, the adults might be able to fly off, but the pups would not be able to. So be careful during this time period. There's a few threats to bats. One is wind energy. Unfortunately, you know, all these green energies, there's a lot of good things behind them, but there's always a negative, unfortunately. And with this, it's mortality to bats, but also birds. When I was graduating and looking for jobs, I actually came across a wildlife tech job at a wind energy company where you literally walked along under the turbines looking and documenting for dead wildlife species, because it just happens. And not only are wildlife species hitting into the blades, but actually flying near them can cause a sudden air pressure drop, which causes internal damage to the animals. There is a lot of research going on to help mitigate these factors. One study has shown, I think multiple studies have shown, that if you actually slow those turbines down to near motionless when it's low wind, so they wouldn't be generating really any electricity anyway, you can really reduce bat mortality, especially during periods when bats are most active, like at night or along their migration corridors. You can reduce bat death by up to 90%. So there's a lot of work being done to try and help the situation. The biggest threat right now is white nose syndrome in this part of the world. So white nose syndrome is a fungus. It's an invasive fungus. It came to the US by accident in 2006. It came to Albany, New York, probably from someone that was in a cave in Europe where this disease just occurs naturally. It probably was on their clothes or boots or some sort of equipment that they then brought to a cave in Albany, New York. From there, that fungus took hold. It's a cold, humid, loving fungus. And so it fit right into these caves and mines where it then found bats. It only affects bats when they're hibernating and they're using these caves and mines. And it grows along their skin. When it first hit, it had this characteristic feature where it would create these white, fluffy fungus things on the bats' muzzles. And that's where the term white nose syndrome came from. We don't really see that as much anymore, even though the bats are infected. And when it first hit, biologists had no idea what was going on. Like I said before, a lot of biologists will go into these hibernation sites during the winter to do surveys and research. And when they were showing up like normal, they were seeing tons and tons of dead bats. This is outside a cave in Pennsylvania on the top right, where this biologist just saw a pile of dead bats. These bats were waking up from hibernation when they shouldn't have. They were confused and disoriented. It creates these big holes in their wings, and there was this mass mortality event. In some places, like our mine in New Jersey, we've seen up to 99% decline. Not in every species, but some have been hit very, very hard. 5 to 7 million bats have died across the US. This map's a little outdated, 2017, but it just shows the progression of white nose across the country. You can see Albany, New York circled in red, and from each year is a different color. It would spread more and more. Once it took hold in the Appalachian Mountain Range, it just swept southward and started marching its way westward. Unfortunately, it did make a big jump to Washington State, I believe in 2016, so 10 years after the arrival of the fungus. Even though there had been a lot of precautions in place to try and prevent this, a lot of caves that are tourist attractions were either closed down, or there was a lot of, walking through bleach water afterwards, after you were done visiting the cave, just to try and decontaminate yourself. But it did happen. We're not totally sure yet how this disease is going to affect our Western bats. We don't think that they hibernate in the big numbers that we used to see out on the East Coast. And there's a lot that's not known about our Western bats, so we're not sure yet how that's going to play out. We do a lot of research at Rutgers on white nose because we're seeing that after that initial catastrophic decline, at least the little brown bats, survival rates are starting to rebound a bit. And what happens is a lot of times during these situations, when you have this huge pressure, such as the disease, not a lot of times, but sometimes there is this hypothesis called evolutionary rescue, where if most of the general population of something is wiped out, you may have these genetically resistant individuals that are remaining. And we hope that if that is true, they will pass those resistant genes on to their offspring. But since they only have one pup a year, that's going to be a long process. But we are finding that some of these bats that we know have been around for years and years, and they're infected with the fungus year after year, are surviving. They didn't die in that initial outbreak. So we'll see. Time will tell. Research is pending. When we take samples of these bats, it's a very small skin sample, which you can see it's 2 millimeters big, so it's very small. And from that, we can extract all that DNA and do that research. Now we'll move on to bats in buildings. Any questions on white nose syndrome? Yep.
Is it true that it's subsiding?
Not well. White nose the question was, is white nose syndrome subsiding? So the problem with white nose syndrome is that it doesn't need the bats to survive. So once a cave or a mine is infected with it, it can live on the soil and in the walls of the cave. So it's not going anywhere. We can't get rid of it, but it does seem in some species it's getting a little bit better. We had that initial die-off, and now some species are rebounding a little bit.
If you saw it in the soil or on the wall of the cave, what would it look like?
You really wouldn't be able to see it. One way to find it is using a UV light, and it like glows. Other ways is you have to just take samples and then go back to the lab and actually grow it out and see if it was present. It's hard to see. Yeah.
Have they tried to kill the spores? Is that possible to treat the mines?
The question was, have they tried killing the spores to treat mines and caves? That was an initial idea, but there's so many native fungi and other species that live in caves. It's like this whole cave ecosystem. So you can't go around like bleaching it because that would kill everything else. There is some ideas to create like artificial mines that maybe bats would use and that can be kind of bleached down every year to try and create these like havens for them. But I'm not sure how if that's actually happened or if it's worked. Yeah, exactly, something like that.
So would the bat boxes be safe?
Bat boxes are safe because the bats are not hibernating in them during the wintertime. They're only used during the summer. And when bats wake up from hibernation and their immune system kicks in, that's when they fight off the fungus. And by the time they're out, at their summer locations, they're not really infected anymore. It goes away. Yep. So bats in buildings. Unfortunately, bats can be considered a nuisance species because two of our species in particular really like living in people's houses. And you might think, well, why do they like living in people's houses? Well, these two species do form colonies, and they like being in these big groups. And an attic space or somewhere else in someone's home is nice, it's dry, there's no predators, it's warm, it's a perfect spot for a bat to raise a family. So this is why we sometimes find them in these places. This is just a diagram showing some of the more common spaces that bats use. Attics, obviously, but also under a torn window, behind gutters, behind shade, behind loose siding. Really anywhere they can fit into, they will try to get into. Bats are protected under the New Jersey Endangered Non-Game Species Conservation Act. This means that you cannot kill, hunt, harass, or harm bats in any way. So the use of glue traps is illegal. I also would argue it's not a good way to try and kill anything. So I would recommend not using glue traps. But specifically for bats, you legally cannot. And we find them all the time. If we do an attic inspection, people might have them up, or they don't even realize they had them up because the pest control company put them there, and a lot of times we take them out. So unfortunately, the only way to get bats to stop using your attic or somewhere on your house is to perform what's called an exclusion or an eviction. Bats are very persistent. They like to be where they like to be. So what you have to do is figure out where they're coming in and out of. And one way to do this is through, we call it an exit count or an emergence survey. You hang outside on your lawn, looking up at your house at dusk, and you wait for the sun to go down. You hear the birds stop chirping, and all of a sudden you see bats flying out. If you can pinpoint exactly where they're leaving from, that's really great information for a wildlife control company to then come in and fix it. So after you figure out that primary spot, you then seal up all those secondary cracks and crevices. Bats can get into very small cracks and crevices, so they all have to be sealed up. And then you put a one-way device over that primary exit. In this picture, it's a piece of mesh, and that allows the bats to leave, but they can't get back in. And you have to leave that up for at least a week with good temperature, not too rainy or windy. Just give those bats a chance to all leave. And then once that happens, you can seal up that primary crack and you're good. Since bats are protected, we can't harm them. There's a lot of regulations surrounding them. One of those regulations is on the timing that you can perform an exclusion. So there's two safe periods of time that you can do this work. One is in April. So this is after the bats have waken up from hibernation. You can't do an exclusion during the winter time because bats are known to hibernate in people's attics, but there's no way of telling if they're there because they're sleeping, they're not pooping, they're not peeing, they're not making noise. So if you did an exclusion and you sealed up all those spaces, they would wake up in spring and be trapped and they would die. The other time that you can't do the exclusion is during the summer. Like I said before, when they're giving birth, there's about a 5-week period where those pups can't fly. So if you did the exclusion, the adults would be able to leave, but the pups would be trapped. So it's fine to do it August 1st to October 15th. That's like the sweet spot. All the pups can fly, and it's before they're hibernating. So if you do have bats, that's the best time to get the exclusion. Bat houses are something that you can consider putting up on your house. Our program at Rutgers runs a bat house distribution program where we will put up a free bat house to anyone getting an exclusion done on their property. We can also sell you guys a bat house if you're interested in just having one. But the catch is that they do best on homes. And that's hard to convince people, especially after they're paying a lot of money to get the bats kicked out of the house. But through studies that we've done, studies that other organizations have done, have just found that bats placed on structures, especially the ones receiving that exclusion, are way more successful. We've put up so many bat houses on poles and trees, and close to zero have ever had bats use them. Probably because the species using the bat house is the big brown or the little brown. They're the ones that like houses. They're the ones that are getting kicked out of these houses. They're coming back to these houses to try and find a way in. When they realize they can't get in, they're going to be looking pretty close by for somewhere else to live. Probably they'll be moving into your neighbor's house, but hopefully they'll pick a bat house instead. Placement is important. It should be at least 12 feet above the ground, receive a good amount of sunlight every day, and be free from obstruction. Bats will get eaten by hawks and owls, so having trees kind of at a distance is a good thing. And if you do happen to be close by to a stream or a river or a lake, that's also going to increase your chances of having bats move in. Here's just some examples. So we have put bat houses up on poles, trees, that's kind of what it looks like, but houses are best. Bat houses can be put up any time of year, especially if you're just putting one up, you don't have bats living in your attic already. But it's best to put them up in the spring, like early spring, before bats are returning from their hibernation or migration. And if you are getting an exclusion done, it's not totally necessary, but it helps a lot if you can put the bat house up before that work begins. That gives bats time to kind of explore and like figure out that it's there. They're very smart and curious, so they'll probably check it out. And then once they're kicked out of your house, hopefully they move right in. There's no way to attract bats. We have a lot of people contact us asking if they can buy a spray on Amazon that will like smell good and the bats will like it. There's no evidence or data to support that. The only thing you can really do is just have an appropriately sized bat house and put it in the best spot you can on your property. It might take a few years. It might never work. You could try relocating it every few years to see if that helps. But that's the best you can do. And that's all I got. Here's my email if you want to contact me, and also our Facebook. Please like it. We post not only about bats, but all sorts of wildlife. Yes.
I do have one question
Okay.
about the animals. I'm sorry, I'm fixated on the blood-sucking bats.
Yes, yes.
But I'm wondering if that hurts the animal. You said they feed for about 20 minutes and then they go away?
I don't think so. It's such a small amount of blood that I don't think it actually affects them at all.
Unless they have rabies.
Exactly. It can transfer disease, but to my knowledge, those animals have no idea it even happened.
So, the bat houses, they won't, even if it's on the side of your house, they won't hibernate in the bat house?
No, so it's too, I believe it's just too cold. They have very specific requirements for hibernation. It has to be a very like steady temperature and a certain humidity. So these caves and these mines like are perfect for that, but the bat house wouldn't work. Yeah.
So I read a while back that the white nose syndrome was the biggest like mass extinction that we have ever logged as humans in any kind of wildlife situation. Is that true that you know?
I don't know that for sure, but it absolutely has been devastating. Those initial die-offs have just been really, really bad. I haven't heard that specifically. It could definitely be true. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. Yes.
When they're 5 weeks, you said, before they can fly, how are they sustained by the mother when they're in that state? How do they eat?
They breastfeed. So the mothers will go out and feed on insects. They'll eat up to their body weight every single night in insects just to pack in the calories, and then they'll feed their young when they come back to the roost. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I think I forgot to mention that when the bat gives birth, the baby is 40% of the mother's body weight, which don't even want to imagine. But they're big babies. That's why they only have one.
So you would recommend that if you do see one in your home, that you should try and remove it from there. You shouldn't try to,
Yes, correct. So if you have a bat in your home and you know for sure that it hasn't bitten anybody, one thing you can do is close the door of the room that it's in so that it can't fly around and get lost. Open up all the windows, and the best thing to do is wait in that room and watch it fly out. Or if it's landed, you can get like a shoebox to put over it, slip like cardboard under that, and then just release it outside. But a lot of times they can crawl into like a crack or behind the bed or somewhere, a lampshade, and then you don't know if they've left or not, and then that can be scary. So yeah, if you can figure out a way to trap it or just open a window and see it leave, that's the best.
Right, and if you see them like, they've been there overnight, or you don't know if they're there overnight, then you should report it, or?
Yeah, you can call your animal control agency if you're not sure it's still in there. They could probably come take a look. But typically, if you do open the window, they should move out. They don't want to be there as much as you don't want them there. And usually, the most calls we get about bats in houses are in that late summer period, and it's usually the juveniles that just learned how to fly and they don't know what they're doing and they get caught. The other thing is to figure out how they got in the first place. If there's like, your window screen has a hole, or there's some sort of gap that they can get from the attic into your bedroom, it's perfectly legal to seal that up at any time of the year so that they're not getting into your living space. They're only using like the non-living space.
And is it improving for bats? Because I know that we've had a mosquito.
Yeah, this has been a bad year.
Yeah.
It depends. So big brown bats are not really affected by white nose. We don't know why, but they seem fine. And we're seeing we're seeing big brown bats where we used to see little brown bats. So their numbers might be on the rise, whereas little browns are still very low. They're just so hard to study that we just don't know that much about their populations. But we're hoping that things will get better. And there's so much more education going on, like programs like this. And these things weren't happening 10 years ago. So one thing white nose syndrome has helped is the education component. More people are aware of bats. They want to help bats. They're not as scared of bats. So that is a good thing.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, I just have a quick question. So I go for walks in a nearby park at dusk, and I see all the bats, and it seems like they're gonna fly right into my bed.
Yeah. So that is definitely it looks like that. Bats, you often look up and they're flying above your head. So we emit carbon dioxide, which bugs really like. Have you ever noticed like gnats like flying above you? So that's what the bats are going after. They're going after the insects that are attracted to you, and the bats are attracted to the insects. But they don't want to be in your hair. It might look like that, but.
So they're really good, right? They won't.
Yeah, they won't. I've had bats fly like right at me and then just zoom off at the last second. It looks like they're coming right at you, but they don't want to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Everything is great. I do have significant concerns. Under no circumstances would I ever seen anyone recommend my email, in fact, was treefriend at Verizon.net. I will ask you to remove that from the slide, but I will also ask whoever is in charge to do that, because it's an awful thing to kill a tree. And there are enough snags and enough trees dying without people going out there. They actively destroyed on the tree. I was stunned.
I think a lot of people's first reaction is to remove dead trees. So.
Removing dead trees, I can see where you want to keep snags.
Right.
Understood. And there's competing needs because you've got liabilities for your home.
Right.
In the forest, it's one thing, but if you're maintaining a woodlot, But are you good in trees?
They're just so good for wildlife. So if there are none available, it can be a really big help for so many species.
And the tree is the oldest thing on this planet. It's as alive as a battery.
I hear you. I do develop these programs.
I want to make sure it's taken. That's my.
It's fabulous. Now, we were trying to figure
If
out.
you're saying we'll take that as a story, we're done.
But we should do this, we have like.
Once they're gone, I'll say this is not.
All those actually know how to come out.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah, that's.
That's the Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah, Mazel, and they have better equipment, so we don't have to jerry rig quite so much, but. it's
Right.
working so that you can- Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, planning that made it.
Yeah, well, plus those ladies upstairs. They got it all covered. Hey, she's got a DC, straight
Right,
everything
just
out.
fix everything.
That's it.
I'm Judy.
I'm gonna hang around for a little bit longer.
Yeah, black, the white, that's.
Oh, they are?
Yes, yes. And the white, that's.
Oh, really? Luckily, yeah, there has to be a bite. No, so there's a disease called Dispersing that you can get for bat water in large quantities, but there's not been a single case in New Jersey. It's more in the Mississippi River Valley. And I think it's more associated with like chicken, like flocks, like people that have birds. Because of bird dropping. Yeah, so the state biologists shut down any entry into the mine the last 2 years, I believe, just to give the bats like a rest. Because when we do go in there, it's pretty disruptive. Make the bats stop and we, take a bunch of measurements on them. So she wanted to just give them a rest. I believe they're going back for survey this year, so we're all so curious what the numbers are going to be like. Yeah, but yeah, because of all the research that are done before white nose, it was so easy to track the population in time. Yeah. But luckily we have that data.
We don't get your. My daughter's successful.
How did you do that? She's at 3 years of
Mostly.
Oh, wow.
They're doing
But you can't.
reporting their conditions.
Yeah.
Programs that say, this bat, this bat, this bat.
Oh, that's.
That's awesome. Yeah, work out there. They're doing more and more using white nose, which is good because a lot wasn't known about a lot of the species.
They were misletting, they were taking
Cool.
Just the deer things.
They saw what
So you can buy in Home Depot.
and they didn't see any.
Now, I'm an engineer, so I've got it structured so the icing.
Had to report it in Washington State.
But that's not. And
Yeah, I think a hiker in the winter came across a bat
Look
that
like-
he thought didn't look right. He brought it to a rehab and they tested positive. That's how they found out. Crazy.
Trees.
Yeah.
But you've got a big piece of property. In many ways, it's good to have some dead trees to let more light in.
There's a lot of, I think the problem.
There's this and that.
Yeah. The problem is you have like an even stand of trees where there's no variation. And you're not allowing other types of habitat.
Yeah, there's other animals that need the dead trees. You take out every dead tree.
I'll tell you what.
Right.
Where you can
And back before
get a hold of.
people were
some
here,
lime.
that was just happening naturally all the time.
Lime,
So it's just trying to mimic those like natural
Yeah.
processes.
No, you're right.
Best we can.
I lived in beautiful New York.
Thank you.
Thanks for your brief
I had
presentation.
Thank you, thank you.
Plot of land that was about this size, this one. Four corners.
See you around the field.
Yes, thank you very much.
I made the rounds outside, I'm gonna do.
Four corners.
And here he is.
Well, hi, Kathleen.
Hi. Aw.
It's a carnival.
Really hope I'm not giving the exact same spots you do.
I don't know who they are,
Well, there you go.
Yeah, we'll give you credit.
Thank you so much, that
Yeah, no
was
problem.
fantastic. So do you know Brooke Maxwell?
Yeah, she's my boss.
Oh, you're kidding. She's my
Oh, you're
dad's
awake now?
good friend's daughter, so I hear about her all the time, I haven't seen her all the time. But we had a bat in our house one time, and my dad told her to ask her what we should do.
Favorite.
She's
Great.
What is your name?
Melissa. Yeah, tell her Melissa Kozma said hello.
Okay, I will.
She'll know.
Yeah, she's my boss.
Oh, that's
I've been working
awesome.
for her like 5 or 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Oh, that's funny. So yeah, this is fantastic.
Thank you.
So great.
Are you
You're
from
able to be.
Tiffany?
No, I'm the library director.
Oh, okay.
But I live in Downtown.
Okay. Cool. I grew up in Somerville.
Oh, yeah, okay, nice. Where are you now?
Keyboard.
Oh, wow, okay. Are you in New Brunswick, I guess?
Oh, yeah, I'm in New Brunswick. So, yeah, it's about a 30-minute.
Yeah.
But my brother was in Whitman.
Oh, good. Cool. Well, thanks again.
I have everything.
My real objective, which was way over his head, and that's what I presented for you, was to complain to the town.
Hi.
About here.
I have a
The gal who was-
Okay.
that I'd like to have installed.
Yeah.
Can I do that through
Yeah.
the website? Okay.
Definitely.
But you said spring instead.
Yeah, so we,
Okay,
have a bunch of bad we're supposed to be starting.
Yes, let me,
Having trouble.
my laptop's right down here.
Probably it's the lavalier.
Okay,
Yeah, feel free to email me.
so you keep asking on the stuff?
No, you can take it off.
Okay, cool.
We're live stream, so all of this is
Oh,
going out there.
Cool.
No, he's right here.
That'd be unfortunate.
All right.
Okay.
Shoot him away. They don't put their feet through. No? That's what I was concerned with. In our compost, they're almost like, they really are. You drive in your car, they don't. It's like a lot of, you get out of the car, you go near it, or run. Oh, yeah. I can see what it's.
Did you make an announcement, Lisa?
I did, but I can, again, real quick.
No. Okay.
If you guys want to see, our one friend is a little more active right now
Oh.
because he got jostled and he is not happy.
Oh. Sorry.
Their big campaign is, where is the HDMI?
Should I say it really quick?
Is everyone bring their own HDMI?
If I could get it with my phone, I would take a lot of pictures.
You know what it looks like, you may have another one.
Share it.
Okay, that's good to know.
All right, we got folks gathering in.
Better ending than I was visualizing.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Got it?
Two guys over here, that guy over here. They both shot.
Yeah, if you want to see how big a little brown bat is, that's that guy on the screen right there.
Oh, yeah, look, wow.
Yeah, and that's my own hand. They get
Wow.
so much tinier.
Yeah, I've never seen one.
You do presenter mode? What do you do? There we go.
Okay.
Well, what am I doing here now? I know. I've wasted the whole. Because I didn't think to do it. You are.
I'm here.
We'll give it about another 2 or 3 minutes, then we'll go. We are live streamed, so everybody watch the language.
to wash the dishes, scrub the floors, cut the grass.
You think you got it, he did you got it.
Yeah.
Not her awake, because there was a harder to see.
Yeah, he's a little more easily perturbed. I've worked with him before in the past, and he's usually pretty active and chattering away.
Making sound. When you say chattering away, I can see his mouth moving, but does he actually make sound?
A little bit. I have a bat detector here that can pick up on it a little.
Ah.
Oh, there. Of you outside, I didn't see your back.
There they are. There.
Yeah, he's being pretty quiet.
I don't think they're real bats. They're
He's moving right now.
Where?
He's
Right
starting.
down there, he's moving.
He's moving.
He's doing his thing.
Oh, there's his little fingers that they were talking about.
Yeah.
That Kathleen was just talking about.
Yeah, those are their back feet and then their wings that claw in there as their thumb. Yeah, hopefully I'm different enough from Kathleen's.
She was saying that they really, the bat houses, that's questionable whether they, it's hard to get them to.
Yes, yeah, there's no surefire way to get them
Yeah.
in that house, unfortunately.
And they'd rather the shag trees and the bark and the.
Your attic.
I remember one time when I was a kid, we had a bat in our house.
That's true.
And, everybody was running around with brooms. Yeah,
Well, there's
it's
this-
crazy.
There's this myth, I guess, that they go in your hair, right? Right?
Yep, that, I addressed that in my thought.
Good.
Nobody wants to hear that.
That's one.
It is not true. I have definitive proof that that's done.
Okay,
Well,
why
I'm
don't
gonna
we
keep
all
my hat
settle
on.
in and we
Wrong.
can start?
I'm not getting my hair.
You have to work.
Okay, I have to start. I'll introduce you.
Sure.
All right. Step on back if you would, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Once again, we are live on our Facebook, YouTube page. And I am pleased to introduce to you Parsippany Councilwoman Janice McCarthy, who serves as a liaison for the town to the Parsippany Environmental Advisory Committee. She serves on our Parsippany Bat Protection Project Steering Committee and took the lead in having our town council pass a resolution supporting the Bat Project and Bat-apalooza and the Green Fair. This demonstration of local support is very important for our effort to protect bats in our town. So here we are, Councilwoman McCarthy.
Thank you, David. For coming here today. The Conserve Wildlife Foundation of New Jersey works to protect rare and threatened species in New Jersey. The CFW has provided valuable information and expertise to the Parsippany Bat project. And you can learn more about the important work that they do and how to support their efforts at conservewildlifenj.org. And that's conservewildlifenj.org. But most importantly, they brought our special guests with them today to our Bat-apalooza and the Parsippany Green Fair, a pair of big brown bats. I thought they were going to be bigger, but they're big enough. I'm pleased to welcome Ethan Gioiardi, wildlife biologist for the Conservative Wildlife Foundation of New Jersey. Thank you, Ethan.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, as she said, my name is Ethan Gioiardi. I'm a wildlife biologist with the Conservative Wildlife Foundation of New Jersey. I don't need to talk more about that. She gave a wonderful introduction. I do have two special guests with me today, two live big brown bats on loan to me from Mercer County Wildlife. These are two big brown bats that were brought to them, both stuck on glue traps. One is missing an ear, the other is missing part of his wing, so that they're not able to be released back into the wild because they can't fend for themselves. So they spend their time over at Mercer being very well taken care of, munching on lots of mealworms, and then they come out to events like this to help educate the public. After my talk, I can show them off a little bit on the live stream, and then as everyone is heading out, please feel free to walk by our bat friends, say hello, just no flash photography or tapping on the glass. They are, little guys, and we're very big and scary. So let's talk a little bit about the bats that we have here in New Jersey. I know you guys saw the big browns over there, and you're like, wow, those are really tiny. Well, this picture right here I have is a little brown bat, an even smaller species of bats. That is my own hand. As you can see, that is a real tiny guy, and just one of the many different bats that we have living here with us in New Jersey. But kind of important to start from a more basic perspective, which is, if this would work, come on. What are bats? Kind of general, but I'll get to the point here. Bats are mammals, first and foremost. Mammal is a warm-blooded animal, has hair, gives live birth, feeds its young milk, things like that. Mammals are, cows, primates, humans, wolves, whales, but what are bats not? And importantly, bats are not rodents. A lot of people think bats are rodents. They're flying mice. They are not. They are actually their own independent group of animals known as chiropterids. The order of Chiroptera, which bats belong to, means hand wing. That's because their wings are modified hands. Over evolutionary time, their little fingers have gotten really long and formed this leathery membrane between them, and that is what they utilize to fly. There's actually only one other animal in the entire history of the Earth that has found a method of flying similar to bats, and that is the pterodons, your pterodactyls, which also used membrane between bone. So that's pretty cool. But if you want to get a better look, that is a big brown bat wing held up to a light. We do this when we're studying bats to look for scarring in their wings. It could help us see how healthy that bat is and give you a really good idea of what those little finger bones look like in their wings. And that little claw on the top that they used to get around is their thumb. It'd be like if you were crawling around like this, but giving a thumbs up all the time. Here is a little video I have. I studied bats for 5 or 6 years. I'm on my 7th year studying bats. It was only within the last year or two that I remembered that iPhones can do slow motion. And I started taking some cool slow motion videos. Bats are interesting because unlike birds have powered takeoff. Bats can't just jump up from the ground and fly. They need to drop off from somewhere. So this is what it looks like when you have a big brown bat in your hand and he's getting ready to fly off into the night with those hand wings. And that's really cool. They kind of have that weird swoopy motion. Bats don't really glide like birds do. They need to constantly be flapping their wings. That's why they got such thick little necks, because they're little balls of muscle. There are over 1,200 species of bats we know of worldwide. 47 of them can be found here in the United States, and 9 of them call New Jersey their home. That is a look at the phylogeny of the order of Chiroptera, which means that is every species of bats we think we know of so far, and there is a lot of them. They are an incredibly diverse group of animals. They are actually account for 1/4 of all species of mammals. So 1/4 of all mammals is a bat. They are only beaten by rodents, which are 2/3 of all mammalian species. So if you look at mammals, most mammals are rodents or they're bats, which is insane. There's so many of them, and they have adapted to so many different parts of the world, so many different environments. They all have their own little niche, and they all look so much different. There's a lot of bats here. The bottom right is a really cute one. That's the dog-faced bat, because he looks like a dog. The upper right is the Visored Bat. He's got a little weird skin flap above his eyes. We do not quite know what it's for. We think it might be some form of mate attraction, or it keeps the moonlight out of his eyes.
Or maybe the sunlight.
Good, well, he's nocturnal, so probably not the sunlight. The bottom left is the Tufted Bat. He's got that little puffball. We think it's for mate selection, but we don't know. If you see a theme. There's the hammerhead bat. There's the leaf-nosed bat, the Honduran white bat. But my favorite is the guy in the left in the middle. That's the painted bat. There is no Photoshop or manipulation there. They are actually bright orange. They're little Halloween festive dudes.
Their wing is actually cleared, so that's cool.
Yeah. I will take questions at the end now. But because of all the adaptations bats have, they all look incredibly different. Like you just saw, some of them have really big ears. Your echolocating bats need to hear well. So they got these really big ears, but fruit bats don't echolocate. So some of them have pretty small ears. Some of them have gigantic eyes. It is a myth that bats are blind. And in fact, fruit bats can see incredibly well. And a lot of the fruit bats, to be able to pick up all that fruit in the rainforest where they're trying to eat, they need those really big, well-developed eyes like this guy. But some of them echolocate, and they don't really need all that good a vision. This guy has like those little black dots above his little kind of nose there. He doesn't really have a face, he's all ears. But he's got real tiny eyes. Some of them are super fuzzy, like this woolly bat. He lives in a colder climate, he's got to stay warm, so he's got that little puffy, tough fur all over his body. And some of them are naked, like the naked bat. He lives in the rainforest, it's very hot, he doesn't need to stay warm, so I don't know, evolution decided he'd be a nudist. Some of them are objectively pretty cute, like this fruit bat here. Got a mouthful of banana or mango or something. Some of them are pretty darn ugly. Like this guy, the wrinkle-faced bat, one of my favorite bats. This little weirdo. So there are two main groups of bats. There's fruit bats, and there's who are your mega bats, and there's micro bats, who are your insectivorous little flying bats. This guy eats fruit, so he's a fruit bat, right? No, he is technically an insectivorous bat. He's a micro bat, but he eats fruit. And this little face is an entire adaptation to help him eat fruit. It's hairless, he's got all these wrinkles, and he's got this wide mouth full of razor sharp teeth, because what he does is he lands on a fruit and bores his whole face into the side of it. And that is that little ugly face that only his mother and I could love is to help him eat that fruit. The world's smallest bat, in fact, the world's smallest mammal, is known as the bumblebee bat or the Kitty's hognose bat. Find them in Thailand. They are about 1.5 inches long, nose to tail. They have a 3.5-inch wingspan, and they weigh about 2 grams. For reference, a penny weighs 2.5 grams. So that is incredibly small. If you wanted to see what that looked like on a hand in person right now, a baby one will probably be as big as this bat ring I have on my finger right now. They are incredibly tiny. The other side of that, we have the largest bats in the world. They're a group known as the flying foxes. There are two that compete for the largest bat in the world. There is the largest on average and the largest bat, single bat we ever found. On average, the large flying fox has a wingspan of 4 foot 11 inches, probably taller than some of the kids in the room here. And the largest single bat we ever found was a giant golden crown flying fox that had a wingspan of 5 foot 7, which I have measured this wide, wings like that. But no need to worry, these are not giant flying man-eaters trying to pick up little dogs like hawks. They eat bananas and mangoes and all those different fruits. So all these gigantic bats, they're all fruitarians, kind of like Steve Jobs. Bats use echolocation. This is like a super cool thing that they do. As I said before, fruit bats do not echolocate. It's only the microbats that do, your little insectivorous bats. Echolocation is this phenomenal adaptation they have. They're able to navigate their environment using sound alone. It's not their version of sight. They, have eyes to see, and they can see about as well as you and I can. Echolocation is their night vision. So instead of developing eyes, like a bobcat or something, to be able to see at nighttime, they use sound. They emit a high-pitched frequency that we can't hear, but they can. That bounces off their environment, that echoes back into their ears, and that lets them, make a picture in their minds of what the environment around them looks like. Their echolocation is actually so finely tuned that they can see down to the thickness of a single human hair using sound alone. So they can see everything that is going on around them. And that's how they're able to hunt things like mosquitoes and moths flying around in the pitch darkness. If you want to hear what this looks like, come on, next. No, don't skip it. There we go. Is this going to make the sound? No. I swear I can do it. Come on. Nope. You gonna do it? You gonna play the video? Apologies. Hear that little clicking? That is the sound that a bat makes.
When it's echolocating.
Yes. Oh, now it plays it. Yeah, now you can see him in his little face. So bats don't just make sounds that we can't hear. They do have a range of the noises that they make that we can hear, which is that clicking. Part of it is ultrasonic, which means it's above our range of hearing, but they still need to be able to, communally communicate with each other, or, give a warning call if there's a predator nearby, and that's kind of what that call is. That bat was not happy to be handled by me because I'm a giant just picking him out of the air. But anyway, bats have a lot of cool adaptations to help them echolocate, most importantly in their ears. So their ears have become super adapted to echolocating. The parts of their ear are actually analogous to all the same parts of the human ear. The pinna is that spoon-like outer part, is this little flappy part of your ear. Theirs has become very long and spoon, kind of like dish-shaped over time. This helps them, kind of like a little satellite dish, funnel sound into their ears. They have all those little wrinkles going on. Why we have wrinkles in our ears is to help funnel sound into our eardrums. Sound goes into the parts of your ear and it kind of travels down those wrinkles right into your eardrum, and bats use the exact same method. And their tragus has gotten very long and thin over evolutionary time. Our tragus is this little nub that you have right here. Some people get a piercing there or whatever. Bats is long and thin, and it kind of works like a tuning fork. When sound goes into their ear, it'll actually vibrate that tragus very lightly, and that could travel right down to their ear bones and help them hear all better. And sometimes bats just make their whole ear a face, like this ghost face bat, whose ears have moved farther and farther forward on his face over evolutionary time. And those inner ear wrinkles are kind of just going on in the front of his face. So his whole face works like an ear. It's like a little fleshy satellite dish. And that helps him echolocate all the better. Little brown bats are the longest lived mammals of their size. The oldest bat that was tagged and recaptured was tagged and then recaptured 32 years later. So they can live for an incredibly long time. And they actually reproduce incredibly slowly for mammals of their size. People, again, compare them to rodents. Rodents have lots of babies very often. Bats on average only have one pup a year. And that pup that they have, you can see there, is probably only thumb sized. That pup actually comes out very developed. Based on the body size, comparing a pup to its mother, it would be like a human woman giving birth to a watermelon. Not good. So you really have to give credit to bat moms. Like this eastern red bat, she is very pregnant. Some of the migratory bats can have twins. They don't just have one pup. And this is an eastern red bat, pregnant, about to burst with two little baby bats in there. But let's talk a little bit about the bats we have here in New Jersey. As I said before, there are 9 different species. 3 of them are migratory, which means they fly south for the winter, just like birds do. These are the hoary bat, the silver-haired bat, and the eastern red bat. They tend to be fluffier to be able to handle flying down south in colder climates. These are the ones that'll, sometimes hang in a bush. We've actually found that some of the migratory bats, particularly the eastern red bat, will actually hibernate in certain areas under leaf litter, like on the ground, and that gets a layer of snow over it, and that kind of insulates them like an igloo, and they'll just hang out there all winter. And then we have our 6 full-time residents. These are the northern long-eared bat, the Indiana bat, the tricolored bat, the eastern small-footed bat, the big brown bat, like our 2 friends over there, and the little brown bat. So the full-time residents means they hibernate here. Most of them are cave hibernators. Others, like the big brown bat, will hibernate in places like attics or barns, things like that. You see the little red text there. That is because some of these bats have been listed as threatened or endangered. The Indiana bat has been listed as federally endangered since the 1970s, mainly due to the effects of habitat loss. And the northern long-eared bat is considered in the state of New Jersey to be a threatened species, it is probably going to be listed higher up, and we are very likely going to see the little brown bat listed sometime soon. This is mainly due to the effects of a fungal pathogen called white nose syndrome that has impacted many of our bats since it first appeared in the United States around the winter of 2007, but I will get more into that later. Let's talk about a year in the life of a bat here in New Jersey. What do bats do all year? Well, around this time of year in the fall, bats will actually congregate around the areas where they're going to be hibernating. They'll form what we call a mating swarm. This is bats form a very large communal colony of male and female bats. They'll fly around each other in the evening and they'll all mate with each other. Bats are not actually pregnant over winter when they're hibernating. They actually delay fertilization until the springtime when they self-fertilize and then they're pregnant and they have their babies. This is nuts because mammals don't do that. We see that, in certain fish and other animals, but mammals, by and large, do not delay implantation of an embryo or fertilization. But I don't know, bats want to do it a little different. But once they've done that, they've packed on their pounds before going to hibernate. They'll head to the caves where they'll be hibernating for the winter. When they go there, bats are actually incredibly site-specific. If they find a place to roost that they like, they will return there year after year. And that applies to hibernation as well. We have found that some bats can be found in the exact same spot in the cave where they've been found previous years. So they go into the cave, they find their spot to roost, and then they go to sleep for the winter. When they're sleeping, they utilize a process that we call torpor. Torpor is kind of like super hibernation. They drop their metabolism down to just like above the level to sustain life. Their body temperature drops to ambient air temperature. So these caves stay around 40 to 50 degrees. So their body temperature will be about 45 degrees. Their heartbeat slows to about 1 or 2 beats per minute. And they will breathe about once a minute. So they are just hovering over there. And that's how they're able to last the entire winter, being animals of such a small size. This is what it looks like in some of these caves. This is a picture of a cave in Virginia with some stalagmites there. And that picture on the right is actually a little brown bat hibernating in the cave. Since his body temperature is the same temperature as the wall of that cave, you can see he's covered in this some ice and condensation. And this is actually a picture I took over in Hibernia Mine in Rockaway of a little brown bat hanging there. You can see he has a little silver band over there with a distinct number on it. That's how we tag and track bats. It's not piercing their wing at all. It's a little cuff that goes over their arm like a little bangle. It's got a distinct number on it that we're able to reference in our databases to tell who that bat is year after year. So say we recapture that bat, we can weigh them, measure them, judge their health, and then look back and see how that bat was doing previous years and track them over years to see how these populations of bats are doing. Fun thing about that little cuff there, you see that the letters on top of it, it should say NJDFW, the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife. Well, most of these silver bands that we have on our bats say NJFDW because someone made a typo, and then we printed up thousands of these tags. So shh, don't tell it's on the internet. Oh no. Anyway, in the springtime, bats will emerge from their hibernation. They'll fly out, get a drink of water and some food. In the spring, male and female bats split off from each other. The males will either be solitary or congregate in groups of 2 or 3, called bachelor colony. It's just some dude bats hanging out for the summer. And the female bats will congregate in groups of anywhere from 35 to 75. If there's a large enough place, like an attic or a belfry, they'll sometimes congregate in even larger numbers to form what we call a maternity colony. These females will group together, all have their babies in a big group, because strength in numbers, it's better protection for them, and they'll raise their babies through the summer. Babies will be born sometime in late June, I believe, and then they will cling to their mom for a day or 2, and then they'll be strong enough to hang out in the roost on their own. They'll hang out in there while mom's out foraging during the nighttime. She'll pop in occasionally to feed and check up on her baby. And then sometime by mid-August, those babies will be ready to fly out on their own. And the process repeats itself all over again. Those bats will head to their hibernacula and, it repeats. For your migratory bats in the fall, they start heading south for the winter. They hang out, the migratory bats we have here in New Jersey probably go as far south as the Carolinas. And then springtime comes again, they'll fly back up north. This is what it looks like when they're hanging out in one of their roosts. Big brown bats actually like to congregate pretty densely. You'll see they'll pile up on top of each other. Good example is our two guys over there. They're just constantly on top of each other. It helps them insulate better. I don't know, they use each other as pillows. But big brown bats kind of roost about anywhere. This picture was taken in the belfry of a church because they like to be stereotypical. They'll roost in barns, the siding of a house, the eaves of a house, an attic, or the storm window and screen of this particular house. This is a picture taken over in Flemington. For a few years, this maternity colony of bats came back year after year to roost between the storm window and the screen of a family's window. They actually had a webcam up, and we had a live stream for many years on the Conserve Wildlife website of these bats hanging out the window. It was very neat. I don't believe those bats have returned for a few years, unfortunately. Occasionally, bats will switch up where they roost, and that means that we no longer get to see these little guys hanging out in this window anymore, unfortunately. So, let's talk a little bit about the benefits of bats, because bats are incredibly beneficial. Bats form what we call an ecosystem service. An ecosystem service is anything an animal does in its natural day-to-day activities that benefits humans. And what bats are insect pest regulators. Bats eat every single type of insect that flies around at nighttime. And they eat a lot of them. They eat June beetles, leafhoppers, cucumber beetles, stink bugs, cutworms, gypsy moths. Lots of agricultural pests that you probably have never heard of, but they also eat stink bugs. They eat mosquitoes. They eat the species of mosquito specifically that carries West Nile and Zika. So that takes that out. They can't infect humans that way. Bats actually cannot contract West Nile or Zika. So if they eat an infected mosquito, that mosquito's out of it. They can't spread that disease anymore. They eat basically any kind of insect that's considered a pest to our forests, our human health, and agriculture. And eat a lot of them. One little brown bat can eat 3,000 insects a night. If that little brown bat is a pregnant or nursing mom, she could eat anywhere from 3,500 to 4,000 insects a night. Say you have 150 big brown bats, over a year they can eat 1.32 metric tons of insects. For reference, take 3 gigantic pickup trucks and fill them overflowing with mosquitoes. That's how many mosquitoes just 150 big brown bats can eat in a year. They are worth a lot of money here in the United States. Millions of dollars a year, $50 to $73 million a year is estimated that we save in costs of agriculture because they eat those agricultural pests. If there's more bats eating those agricultural pests, that's less pesticides we have to use on our crops in order to protect them. So more bats is better for the environment. They don't just eat insects that affect the environment, but more bats means that's less chemicals we have to put in the environment, which isn't that good. And this is why here in the state of New Jersey, it is illegal to hurt or kill a bat, any bat, for any reason. And that is why we have very specific do not disturb dates for bats. People get bats in their attic, they want to use their attic, and having bats in there can be a problem. The guano can build up. If the bats end up getting within your living quarters, that can be unsafe. So people do something called an exclusion, which is a safe way to get the bats out and block them from coming back in. You are not allowed to do this from May 1st to July 31st. Why is that? Because that's when the bats have babies. If you do an exclusion at that time, you put something up, mom can get out, can't get back in. Well, her baby is stuck inside your house, and that baby will die because their mom is not there to take care of them, and then you have dead animals in your attic, and worse than that, we have dead bats, and that's a problem. So those are the specific dates you're not allowed to do an exclusion. This is why we recommend people, if you have bats in your home and you do you do not want them there anymore, please use a professional bat excluder who knows what they're doing. On the Conserve Wildlife website, on our Bats and Buildings page, I actually have a list of all of the bat excluders here in the tri-state area. We know we'll do it correctly to keep our bats safe and healthy, and to protect your home and prevent any damage that the bats can cause. As I said before, bats eat every kind of pest insect you could think of, but fruit bats also have a lot of benefits. A lot of those fruit bats help disperse seeds for all the fruit that they eat, but they're also primary pollinators for a lot of different plants, which is really cool because there's a subset of fruit bats that don't eat fruit. They actually feed on nectar from flowers, kind of like butterflies or hummingbirds. And these nectar bats have their own adaptations. Besides the fact that they have these super little fuzzy faces that help collect pollen and they look really cute, dusted and yellow pollen like little bumblebees. Your nectar bats actually have more elongated faces so that they can get their face down into a flower to get at the nectar. That helps the flowers out because that little fuzzy face collects all the pollen. They go from flower to flower and they can pollinate those flowers. But these bats also have significantly longer tongues than other bats, and that helps them get down deep into flowers. And then we have my favorite bat over here. This is the long-tongued bat. He feeds on this very specific type of flower that has a very deep base into it. It's one of the only animals that can reach down there. And that's because a long-tongued bat's tongue is about as long as its body. This is the bat. This is the tongue. It is so long. It is so long, it does not fit in his stupid little fuzzy face. The long-tongued bat's base of their tongue goes down into a special pouch that sits between his heart and his sternum. Because otherwise it'd be flying around with a tongue flopping around everywhere, and that's not very useful for anyone. But there's other benefits to bats. Bat guano is a great fertilizer. If you have a bat house up and there's guano buildup, you could just sweep that up and put it right in your garden. Great for your plants. Or you can buy it on Amazon. I think it's sold for like $7 a pound. I don't know, try it. But bats are also responsible for a lot of advances we have in medical science and technology. No, there are not bats that are doctors, but the way we study bats has led to a lot of different scientific discoveries. Bat echolocation is one of the things we studied to help develop sonar, which is a method humans use to use sound to navigate our environment. Similar, we also study dolphins and other seafaring creatures like that. But also vampire bats specifically have led to some very interesting medical advancements. The saliva of vampire bats has very unique properties that are both antibacterial and anticoagulant. That prevents a bite site from getting infected when the bat bites something to get the blood, but it also keeps that blood flowing. So we've studied the enzymes in their saliva, and it's helped us develop new blood thinners and antibacterials, which is really cool. Let's talk a little bit about myths and misconceptions about bats. Bats get a really bad reputation. People don't like bats, and I'm a little biased, so I don't understand why anymore, because I love them and I think they're adorable and they're great little friends. But some people are scared of them, and because of that, there is a lot of misconceptions and half-truths about bats. First and foremost, bats are not blind, and I have too much time on my hands because I photoshopped sunglasses onto a bat. Bats can see about as well as you and I can, and fruit bats, as I said before, can see even better than us. They have eyesight on par with some bird species, which helps them pick out those brightly colored flowers and fruits in the forest as they're foraging. Bats do not attack humans, and they do not want to become entangled in your hair. This is a very weird old wives' tale. I don't know how it started, but bats are not intentionally trying to get caught in your hair. That's no. And this is actually a picture of a scientist who wanted to disprove this myth, who was misnetting for bats and got a bat and stuck it in her hair. And you know what the bat did? It crawled to the top of her head and flew away because it wanted nothing to do with her. This myth probably comes around because if a bat gets into a house, usually what happens is that bat is very panicked. It does not want to be there. And knowing people get very panicked. And it's a very chaotic situation And in those situations, a bat might fly into someone's face by accident. It's not intentionally trying to attack you or get tangled. It happens because the bat is flying around screaming like, oh no, and you're flying around screaming, oh no. We're running around, humans can't fly. Whatever. But also, people think that bats are trying to attack them, say, if they're hiking at nighttime. Oftentimes, people see if they're hiking around at night and there's bats. Sometimes the bats will swoop down really close to people. That's not because they're trying to attack you. What they're doing is trying to get a closer look at you, because who are these giant things walking around the forest at night? And also, you might think when you're walking in the woods that, oh, these woods are just coated in mosquitoes. That's not true. The mosquitoes are attracted to people because of the carbon dioxide we're breathing out and also our body heat. So we're little walking buffets of insects through these woods. So those bats are swooping down to pick off all the other insects that are flying around our heads. And just so happens that they're getting very close to us. There are no vampire bats in North America, and they do not feed off humans. There's actually only 3 species of vampire bats, and they're all found in South America. There have only been a handful of recorded instances of a vampire bat ever feeding off a human, and I believe one was intentionally done for a National Geographic special. And vampire bats actually primarily feed off of birds. They feed off of livestock. As I said earlier, their saliva has a lot of beneficial properties that keep bite site from getting infected. A vampire bat does not want its host animals to die if it bites it. So they, because it wants to be able to come back and get another meal at a later point. They actually don't drink a lot of blood at all. Vampire bats are very tiny. They probably only drink a few milliliters of blood for a given meal. But the cool thing about vampire bats, they're one of the only instances of true altruism that we see in the mammalian kingdom. Altruism is a way to describe a relationship between animals. Altruism is when one animal does something for another with no benefit or a detriment to itself, but a benefit to that other animal. Great example of this is bees. Something attacks the hive. Some of those bees will sting the intruder. That bee dies when it stings the intruder, but it drives the intruder away, and that helps the colony. So what vampire bats do is they all go out from their colony at night, they get their meals, they come back in the morning. If one bat notices that his neighbor hasn't gotten a full meal, well, that other bat probably will end up starving within the next few days, because blood really isn't that calorically dense. It's a liquid diet. So that bat needs to have a full tummy every night in order to be a healthy, functioning bat. So what the guy with a full meal does is he will look over to his neighbor and throw up some of his blood so that that bat can get fill its belly. And all the bats do that through the whole colony, and they spread their meal out through everyone, so everyone can go to bed with a full tummy. And that helps the colony. So, the guy with a full belly has a little bit less food, but his neighbor has, a meal now, and the whole colony can thrive. So if you guys go home knowing anything about vampire bats tonight, it's that they're communists. It occasionally gets a laugh. I'm so sorry. I have to try. All bats do not have rabies. It is a myth. People think that bats are more prone to rabies than other types of mammals. This is not true. Other mammals do actually have higher concentrations of rabies. In actuality, only 0.5% of bats will ever contract rabies. That's 0.5% of bats will ever contract it, and they die within a day or two if they do. They account for such a high transmission of rabies in humans because when a bat does contract rabies, it wants to break itself away from its colony so the rest of the colony doesn't get sick, and it'll try and find a quiet place where it can kind of pass away alone. But what happens is that bat will often find its way indoors into a human dwelling. And humans will either not notice that there is a bat, acting weirdly on their floor or in another area and accidentally come into contact with that bat, or someone in a number of cases will see a bat flopping around on the floor and not really think things through and go to pick that bat up with their bare hand, that's when they get bitten, and that's when the rabies transmission happens. Bats are one of the higher, they account for a higher percentage of animal to human rabies transmission than some other species, but it is mostly due to where they find themselves when they do contract rabies, and they do sometimes come into contact with humans. It's not like you don't often find a rabid raccoon in your kitchen in the morning, but you can occasionally find a bat. But as I said before, it's very rare that a bat will contract rabies. I am rabies vaccinated in order to handle wild bats, but it is very unlikely that I will ever come into contact with a rabid bat when I interact with them in their natural habitat out in the wild. Just because not many bats really don't have rabies doesn't mean you should go out and handle bats. You should never, ever handle wildlife unless you are a trained professional or under the supervision of one. That's very important. I know that squirrel looks really cute, but please do not try to feed an acorn from your hand. That can lead to a bad relationship between animals and humans. It's not something we want because problems can happen. The first thing I learned when I started working with animals that has stuck with me is if it has a mouth, it can and it will bite. So you always want to be incredibly careful. Bat guano is not deadly. This is something that some people think that bat guano is particularly full of disease that you can catch from it. Bat guano does contain a bacteria called histoplasmosis, but there is a very low transmission risk. You're actually more likely to catch histoplasmosis from bird poop than you are bat poop. And bats in New Jersey really don't congregate in large enough numbers that transmission from their guano is a problem. This is why in like South America, when you see, you watch a nature special and someone's studying bats down there and they go into a cave that's full of 1 million bats, they have to wear a respirator because there are literal mountains of guano, and that cannot be healthy. But here in New Jersey, you see a small pile of guano. There's no way for you to really catch a disease from that. Histoplasmosis is spread. It's a respiratory infection. It's spread through the air, so you would have to powder that guano and breathe in tons of it for it to be a transmission risk. It does glitter, though. I don't know if anyone visited the Rutgers table outside, but I believe they did a bat guano demonstration over there. So bats eat insects, and insects have these chitinous exoskeletons that cannot be digested by bats. So that passes out in their guano. And those crushed up shells of insects and wing membranes, if you shine a flashlight on them, actually glitters like glittery confetti. And if you look at it under a microscope, you can see all the little insect legs and stuff within it, and it's really cool. So if you find bat guano and you don't put it in your garden, you can take a little bit of it, crush it up in your hand, and shine a light on it. I mean, I wouldn't use it as confetti, but it's cool. Important thing to mention now, bats cannot give you COVID or vice versa. So one of the prevailing theories of where COVID came from is that it had an origin within bats. We don't know for sure where COVID came from just yet. But one of the theories is that this coronavirus originated in bats. But this doesn't mean that if you see a bat or one of our bats here that you can catch COVID from them. What they're talking about when they say this is there was a coronavirus in a bat, and a zoonotic disease is when a disease goes from one species to another. So that bat came into contact with another animal. That coronavirus mutated within that animal, and then it went to another animal, and then it went to people. This has happened before with the original outbreak of SARS and with MERS. With MERS, it was a coronavirus that was in a bat that passed to camels, that passed to people. One of the other coronavirus was bats to pangolins to people. So none of that transmission is ever directly from a bat to a person. So if you come into contact with a bat, you're not going to get COVID. And this is just a very complicated way to say that. We also cannot, there's studies that have been done that we're almost certain that humans cannot transmit the novel coronavirus to our bats. Bats have just kind of been caught up in this incredibly unfortunate crossfire of trying to explain these very complicated scientific processes of how pathogens spread. And it's led to an uptick in negative associations between people and bats. But as I can say, as a scientist, there's no definitive idea where COVID even came from yet. But I can tell you, this bat's not wearing his mask right. It's not even covering his nose. But our bats are not going to give you COVID. But there's bats, while bats aren't a threat to us, there are a lot of threats to bats. They're not doing fantastic as of late, unfortunately. This is mainly due to the effects of a fungal pathogen called white nose syndrome. White nose syndrome is a disease that affects hibernating bats and is caused by a fungus. This fungus is called, I have it written down here, and it's so hard to pronounce, Pseudogymnoascus destructans. That tells you something about it. It causes this little fuzzy white growth around the nose of a bat. Primarily, it grows on their wing membranes and will eat away at their wing membranes, which will eat little holes into it. And it's not because, holes get eaten in their wings and they can't fly. What happens is these bats are hibernating. And like I said earlier, bats use torpor to hibernate. Their metabolism is super low, which means their immune system is suppressed. This is why white nose can affect them. The reason they use torpor is because they're really tiny. There's only so much fat stores they can have over the winter. Well, when the bat contracts white nose and it's eating away at their wing membranes, that's incredibly uncomfortable, and it wakes the bat up constantly. It makes the bat thirsty, it makes the bat uncomfortable. So that bat ends up starving by the time spring comes around. In the early days of white nose, we saw mass bat deaths. In areas where white nose hit, we lost an estimated 98 to 99% of the affected populations of cave hibernating bats. And you would see carpets of dead bats in these caves. Hibernia Mine in Rockaway used to have an estimated 25 to 30,000 bats hibernating there every winter. The last time we went there in 2018 to do a census, we counted 300 bats. We have lost a lot of them. There's no cure at the moment. Most efforts to deal with white nose have been focused on helping the remaining bats survive and recover. The reason this is white nose is a fungus. Funguses are very closely related to animals, so most things that will kill a fungus will also kill an animal. And most fungicides we have are very broad, and they'll kill every fungus. And it's not like we can spray our caves with these broad fungicides, because that would destroy the entire microenvironment of these caves and could cause even more ecological harm. So this is a map showing the spread of white nose. We're pretty sure we know ground zero for white nose. It's a cave in Albany, New York. White nose is naturally occurring in caves in Europe. So we're pretty sure that someone was exploring caves in Europe and, they didn't know it was a thing. We didn't even know it was a thing. And, spores got into their clothing or their boots, and they came and visited a cave here in the United States, and it spread from there, getting onto bats, and those bats will occasionally hibernate in a new hibernacula, and it spread from there. By the winter of 2008 to 2009, it was in New Jersey. As of 2018, it's made it out into it's basically the entire eastern half of North America. There's some isolated cases in Washington State. And it's basically just continued to spread. There's not much we can do about that at the moment. There are efforts to see if we can find a cure to it, but those are not, we haven't seen much results from that just yet. And as I said before, most efforts have focused on our remaining bats. So here in New Jersey, we're pretty sure that populations have bottomed out. We don't think that little brown bat or northern long-eared bat populations are going to drop anymore directly due to white nose killing them. We think that most of the bats hibernating here are making it through the winter. But what we need to figure out now is, are those bats healthy enough in the springtime to have and raise pups? Are they passing off some kind of heritable resistance to white nose? Are they maybe larger bats that can handle having white nose over the winter or not get it at all? This is a lot of unknown. As I said earlier, bats only have one pup a year, so it's incredibly slow to build back up their populations. So it'll be a long time before we know for sure if these populations are recovering. And because the populations have gotten so low, we're really afraid of a population bottleneck happening. That's when there's such low genetic diversity left in a population that, there's all your bats that are kind of related to each other. This is something we're experiencing with cheetahs right now, where every single cheetah in existence on Earth right now is the descendant of only 50 individuals. So if a disease rolls through that affects cheetahs, well, because all of them are so related, they have very similar immune systems. It's very likely that that disease can affect all cheetahs. Could this happen to our bats? We don't know. And this is something that like Rutgers is working on. They're doing a lot of intensive genetic studies on white nose affected bat species to see if there is some kind of immunity to white nose or something like that being spread to bats. And they are seeing some promising results. I don't know if Kathleen talked about it. But they've seen certain genetic markers that are showing some kind of rapid adaptation or evolution in our bat populations that could be heritable to their pups. So there is a good possibility that bats can come out of this. There is good news too, because there are bats in Europe. There are bats everywhere in Europe, but that's where white nose came from. Well, we've seen that bats in Europe do not really hibernate in caves or congregate in large numbers in caves. So maybe the population of bats in Europe is a post-white nose population. That maybe hundreds of years ago, white nose affected those bats and they've recovered from it. We don't know because there were no one in 1500 was censusing bats. But it's one of those theories we have, and it's a really hopeful theory. And I really hope that that's true because I'd like our bats to be around, not just because it's how I make a living, but I really love the little guys. And I hope everyone here does too. And we need to do everything we can to protect them. So to move away from white nose, it turns out it's not just white nose that's affecting bats, unfortunately. Wind energy is actually a big problem. This is a big problem for bats and birds, any migratory species. Flighted migratory species will utilize what we call flyways to either fly north or south. The way wind patterns work on Earth is, you have your cold north and south pole and your warm equator. But because of those temperature differentials, you get these circular wind patterns all throughout the world, some moving north and some moving south. So birds and bats will hitch a ride on these air currents to more easily travel north or south while they're hibernating. Well, since those areas are windy, that's where we're putting wind turbines. Wind turbines spin a lot faster than you think they do. They're not just, they're so big, so it kind of looks like they're spinning slowly, but they're spinning fast enough to create a wind vortex, which sucks things in. So when a bat or a bird flies by, they often find themselves unable to fly away from it, and the air pressure basically crushes the animal. We were seeing 500,000 bat deaths a year due to wind turbine placement, around 250 to 300,000 bird deaths a year. Thankfully, this is a problem that is on the cusp of being almost completely solved, which is really cool. We found that with existing turbines during peak migratory season, if you slow the maximum speed that those turbines can spin at, they can still generate electricity, but they don't create that wind vortex. So migratory animals are able to safely pass through. And there's also a lot of advancements in wind energy to make bladeless turbines or different ways of generating electricity from wind that don't create those vortexes and are much safer for our migratory animals. There's also the current push towards offshore wind, which can help avoid that. Though that is something that we're doing extensive studies into now to see which birds and bats might migrate out over the ocean, just to make sure that is as safe as possible. So this is, good news. There's this one problem that bats are dealing with that we think we know what to do about. So we got one thing. And like literally every animal on the face of the planet, bats are up against so much habitat loss. It affects all animals. There's less habitat for them to live. This is the main reason the Indiana bat was listed, and there's also a lot of habitat fragmentation, where we put roads between all the areas these animals migrate between. There's less trees for bats to roost in, just less area for them to be able to forage for food. And one of the important things when it comes to habitat loss is the effects of climate change. This is something that's affecting all animals, whether it's messing up migration patterns. It's also affecting the weather, and particularly important to bats is vernal pools. We're seeing fewer vernal pools stay around for less and less time. As the weather patterns change, we get hotter summers, we get less rain, we get rain at weirder times. A vernal pool is a small pond in the woods that fills up perennially. It'll fill up in the spring and the summer and dry out in the winter and the fall. And bats will form maternity colonies around these pools because these pools are very important for insect reproduction. And those, nymphic insects, these baby insects that are coming up around these pools are really good, easy prey for baby bats who are flying for the first time. And if these vernal pools are showing up less and less, that's less available food for these bats, and it really impacts their colonies. And it affects lots of different animals, because it's not just bats that use vernal pools, it's amphibians, it's literally everything. If we don't do something soon about habitat loss and climate change, this could spiral into a much, much bigger issue that I don't think we're quite ready to comprehend or handle. But to get in the brighter side, what are we doing actively to help our bats? And as a bat researcher with Conserve Wildlife, there's a lot of things that I personally do to help the bats and study the bats that we have here in New Jersey. I realize I've hit my time. I think I'm going to talk for 10 more minutes, then we'll do questions. But there's a lot of white nose research that people are doing. We found that white nose fluoresces under black light, so we can use that to see if white nose is existing on the wings of bats in caves, or see where white nose is growing in caves. There's certain things, I believe Rutgers is doing a study recently, so people are finding that white nose might be impacted by ultraviolet light, and maybe shining certain wavelengths of ultraviolet light in caves would kill white nose, not the other fungus. That's a possibility. That would be cool. Conserve Wildlife has a program called Bats in Buildings, similar to the program that Rutgers does, where if someone's doing a bat exclusion on their house, they can give me or my counterpart with the state, Mackenzie Hall, an email and be like, hey, we're doing a bat exclusion, and I will come out and personally put a bat house up on your property. So when those bats come back, they can't get in your attic, maybe they'll find that bat house. So they'll stay on your property eating up all your mosquitoes, but they're not going to be messing up your attic anymore. We have a program called the Summer Bat Count, where we've been monitoring the populations of different summer roosts of bats year after year. A lot of those have been being counted since before white nose, so it's really important that we continue to monitor those populations so we can see how white nose has affected these over the years. There's also misnetting and radio telemetry, which is one of the main projects I work in the summer. In the summer, I set up stationary acoustic points. These record the ultrasonic bat echolocations, and I can run that through a computer program that can differentiate the species of bat based off the sounds they make. Different species of bats have different frequency to their calls and different accents. They have different patterns to how they call. So looking at that, like that picture on the bottom right, that's a sonogram of a bat call. I can tell what species of bat made that call based on the frequency and the shape. I can tell you with that shape and the fact that it's at around 35 kilohertz, that is a big brown bat. It's constantly 35 kilohertz straight through. We also do mobile acoustics, which is the same principle, except you strap it to a car and you drive that car really slowly around a predetermined route, which is pretty cool. But I want to talk about misnetting and radio telemetry, because I just had a very eventful summer with this. This was my first year back, first time in 2 years being able to go out and misnet bats again. This was because, again, early in white nose, not white nose, early in COVID, there's so many diseases we talk about, oh boy, that you couldn't have large groups of people working together in the woods, so netting wasn't at all possible, because you need a large team for this. But with masking and vaccines and stuff, we were able to finally get back into that. So I want to talk about a season in the field with a bat biologist. So what's mist netting? This is one of the ways we get our hands on wild bats. It's probably the easiest, most popular way we do it. We set up these big nets in the woods. You get these 2 poles with a net between them. We put them in an area we think bats are going to be flying through. The idea is the bat doesn't see the net. They fly into it. They get caught. I can go in and untangle that bat, bring them back to base camp where we can measure their wings, their forearm length. We can weigh them. We can band them. All, the whole shebang there. And if they're one of the important species, we could actually put a tracker on them, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. This doesn't always work out well because, as I said, bat echolocation is really good. So oftentimes I'll be sitting in the woods going to check on a net and just watch bats fly at it and then just go up and over and get really frustrated. Because when we do this, we set up our nets from like 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. And then once the sun has set, I will check those nets every 10 minutes until 2 a.m. So when you don't get bats because they're flying around your nets, it can be really frustrating because it's very tired. Once we capture a bat on and we're done taking care of them, we will release them back with the band on them and they can fly away off into the night. Sometimes this could be a little stressful for bats, so they'll decide to just hang out on your hand for a little while and just look really adorable. We have strict limits on how long you're able to handle a bat. A bat that's caught in the net is only held on to strictly for a half hour. This is to avoid stressing out the bat too much. This guy just did not want to go away. There he goes. And if it is a myota species, one of these white nose affected species, we'll use radio telemetry to track where that bat is roosting in the daytime. Turns out there's a lot we don't know about bats. Bats are active at night and they fly, which makes them notoriously difficult to study. There are only a handful of comprehensive studies of bats done pre-white nose, which is why white nose was such a shock to bat biologists, because then it was like all of a sudden, all the bats are gone and we don't know anything about them. It would be like if tomorrow all the pigeons died. Who's done a comprehensive study on pigeons? They're everywhere. We have time. But if they all suddenly died, like that would be a big problem. So one of the things we don't really know is where do these bats roost during the summer. We know generally, they tend to like these types of trees. They tend to like these types of habitats. But we don't have like a picture of, okay, this habitat has this feature, this feature, this feature. There are definitely big brown bats over there. So what we do is you get one of these little tiny trackers, and that gets glued to a bat's back, which you can see that picture there. That's just some cornstarch to keep that the sticky glue from getting on the rest of the bats so they don't get stuck to it. But we glue that tracker there, and that tracker emits a beeping noise at a specific frequency. So I can get a little radio telemetry receiver with this little satellite on it and listen in for where that noise is coming from during the daytime. And you just listen for the beep, you find what direction it is, and you walk that way a little, and then you pull, and then you spin around again, and I'll know it's coming from there. And then you go that way, and then you do that for like 8 hours in the blaring heat until you find where that bat is roosting, because there is $100 on its back, and you need to find where it's roosting. These are supposed to stay on the bat for about 2 weeks. You can track the bat for 2 weeks with one of these trackers. I've never had one stay on the bat more than 3 days. They get those things off. But yeah, that's a picture of me handling one of the little brown bats we caught this summer. CWF had we were working down in South Jersey to look for these bats, and we were able to catch 3 little brown bats and 2 northern long-eared bats this summer. It's incredibly rare to see these bats. That was the first northern long-eared and little brown bat I had seen in like 3 or 4 years. So it's really cool to get a bunch of them. When you put the tracker on their back, they have to like rest for a little while while the glue cures. So you make a bat burrito, and then they look up at you like that and yell the whole time, which is really cute. This is a close-up look of what it looks like. You kind of glue the hair over it to kind of keep the tracker in there. And you don't just walk around and put that thing around. If you get no beeping anywhere, Sometimes you just have to hang outside of, I used to have long hair. I miss it. But sometimes you just hang out of a car with the receiver and just drive till you hear something because you just want to find that bat. These are some of the friends I found this summer. This was the little brown bat. We were able to track to where they were roosting. This is him yelling at me. Look at that little mouth of teeth. Little brown bat. So you saw earlier with the big brown bats, I was wearing those really thick gloves because that bat can like bite through it. Little brown bats are so small, I just wear nitrils. I can't bite through nitrile gloves. They're so tiny. Oh yeah, this is. Yeah, and this is a northern long-eared bat. You can see the difference. They're about the same size as the little brown bat, except they have less hair on their face and they have that really long tragus and those really big ears. This guy I tracked to the middle of this swamp. You can see me over there. I waded like a half a mile into the swamp and I got that roost tree. This is, I'm finally on like my last slide. I promise I'm done now. But this is the most important thing you could come out of this talk knowing is, I want you to look right here. This is a bat nose. That is the two little lobes and you got their little lips on their chin. The most important thing to know about a little brown bat is their noses are heart-shaped. See?
Oh, wait, yeah, I see now, okay.
And isn't that cute?
Yeah.
So what can you guys do? It's not just me, I need help. It's difficult. There's only so much I can do without public support. So evict your bats properly, like I said earlier, go through a proper excluder, know the dates that work, and do everything you can to keep those bats safe. You can accept your bats if bats are living in the eaves of your house and your siding, in an attic you don't use, as long as those the bats' feces and urine or the bats themselves can't get in your living quarters, perfectly safe to live with them like that. You keep it natural. If you plant a garden, put some flowers in there that attract nighttime pollinators, like certain types of moths. And that'll maybe attract bats to your property because you provided a food source for them. You can provide alternative homes. We, as Kathleen might have said earlier, we don't know how productive bat houses are. Truly, that's something we're working to study right now to see if how many bats you can get if you put bat houses up, but we still recommend people put them up because it's ideal habitat for these bats, and we want as much habitat as possible. Because if these bats aren't doing good because of habitat loss and white nose syndrome, we need to do everything we can to prop up the bats that are still around, and putting up bat houses is one of the things you can do. You can also support our work. The Conserve Wildlife Foundation of New Jersey is a nonprofit. We work off of grants and donations, and public support is a major part of that. So please, visit our website, conservewildlifenj.org. We have a store on there. I sell cool hats. I'll stop being a shill, but we do need public support. And honestly, the most important thing you can do is share what you learned. As I said earlier, bats get a bad rap. A lot of people have a lot of misunderstandings about bats. So if you can, spread the good news about bats and how they're just little guys flying around that want to eat bugs. That's all they are. And we need them around. So thank you for listening. I can take any questions anyone might have. Also, the best part of slow motion is a yelling bat in slow motion. And that's a big brown bat, by the way. Yes?
The proper definition of a vernal pool, you said almost everything, but doesn't the water have to be there for at least a 2-year extended period of time? I read this a while ago.
Not exactly sure. I know it's, the idea is it leaves and comes back on a regular basis. I don't know like the exact textbook. I know more like the field definition.
And you guys have anything to do with critiquing this supposed New Jersey forest management plan? You know what I'm talking
That
about?
I don't know. CWF might be a part of that, but it's not something that I have directly worked with. So I wouldn't know. If you reached out to our our info email on our website, so we would be able to direct you to the person to answer that.
You know what I'm talking about though, right?
I think so.
You think so?
Yeah, around Halloween is the busy season for bat talks and stuff, so I'm kind of running ragged. Turns out people think about bats this time of year. Who would have thought? But yeah, if you email, someone could get you the answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are these little bats?
These are big brown bats.
Oh.
So as you saw in the pictures, he's still going. And that is a big brown bat. The little brown bat's even smaller. And this is one of the reasons I love bringing these guys out, because one of the big misconceptions about bats is how big they are. People don't understand the size of these bats. They think they're much bigger. This guy is one of the larger species of bats we have here in New Jersey. The hoary is the biggest, is maybe 10-15% bigger than this guy, or maybe 20% bigger. But the little brown bat, the other Myota species, are maybe 3/4 the size of that guy. They get so much smaller.
Do you catch them?
So these guys are from Mercer County Wildlife. They were bats sent into them with injuries. These two were caught on glue traps. One lost an ear in the process of being removed. The other one lost part of its wing because of this. They're not healthy enough to care for themselves in the wild. They can't hunt properly. So they stay at Mercer. They're taken care of. They eat a lot of mealworms. They're a little chubby because they can't fly. But they also have a little side job where they come out to help teach people about bats. Yeah.
What's the biggest predator of bats?
Yeah, that's difficult to say. A lot of nighttime predators can be an issue. That has been seen. One of the reasons we don't recommend people put bat houses up in trees is raccoons can be a problem if they try and get up and mess in a roost. Nighttime flying predators can be an issue, like owls. You sometimes see owls eating bats. It depends on the bat species and where and how those bats forage, because some bats are gleaners, which means they'll pick things up off of walls or the ground. Some bat species have been known to eat, some of the larger ones can eat very small mammals or centipedes or scorpions in the desert. So I'm sure some things pop up and get them. I'm sure there's some fish that eat bats because bats will skim over water to get a drink. But I don't have a comprehensive list, unfortunately. That's another one of those things that bats are hard to study, so we just don't have super definitive answers. I have best guesses, but that's about it. Yeah.
Are bats still feeding at 7 a.m.? Because I thought I saw some in my report. But...
They could be.
Okay.
During this time of year, you'll often see some weird bat activity. Even into the early winter, you might see some bats flying in the daytime. Or active at those hours. Bats can be active. I've noticed in my acoustic recordings, I've had bats active up to 7 or 8 a.m. Usually within that time, they start becoming active around an hour before sunset, and then they can be active up to an hour after sunrise. And then in the winter, they're still trying to pack on pounds, or if there was a disturbance in their hibernation, they might come out during the daytime because it's warmer, because the nights can get very frigid. And they'll go in the daytime to either build up some body heat by flying or try and look for a quick meal. Any question?
Yeah, it might be a silly question, but do all bats, when you say roost, is it hanging upside down? And do all bats?
No,
and
not all bats do that. So I'm just gonna flip earlier. Yeah, their noses are heart shaped and Where's that
I
picture?
must have missed it.
So, okay, here's a good example. So fruit bats, the much larger bats, they will roost hanging upside down. So you can see pretty close on those guys, but their feet, the claws on there are recurved, which means they have a hook to them. So they're kind of able to just go on a rough surface and their nails just lock on so they can fully relax and hang from that spot. So that's how fruit bats hang from trees like that. Our migratory bat species do that much more often. You can see that hoary bat down there is just hanging upside down by its 1 foot. The migratory bats are really cool. So most other bats don't have hair on their tail membrane. They're naked. You can see it on those guys there. but your migratory ones do have hair on their tail membrane. So they'll hang from a tree branch by their one foot, and with their other foot, they'll flip it over their face. So that they turn into a little puffball sleeping bag, so they can stay warm using their tail membrane as a blanket, which is really cute. But those guys will hang by one foot in pockets of like dead foliage in trees.
Do they get something by being upside down? Like, what
No,
is
it's just their feet they're adapted to.
Okay.
There's no other benefit than they can rest much more easily because they don't have hands. There's no like upper thing to hold them. They just have their little thumb claw sticking out.
Yeah.
So they do hang down from that thing, and you'll often see bats just kind of clinging to the wood. And this was taken in a church belfry where all the bats were just kind of clinging onto the side of the thing.
But they're not upside down, they're just.
These guys were looking down at me, but you can see them like flat up against the ceiling, anything, as long as they're like, they got their little Velcro on the wall, they're fine. Yeah, they're not like obligate upside down hangers. Any other questions? So otherwise, thank you guys for listening in, and please say a nice farewell to our friends over on the side.
Yeah, thank you, great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please no flash photography or tap in the glass.
That's enough bats for the
Yeah,
day. See you later. Yep.
You got sensitive little eyes.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm always happy that people like to hear me ramble about that. I'm lucky I could have talked for so much longer.
So are they asleep right now? Or do
Yeah.
they just kind of?
Yeah, they're
not move a
asleep.
lot? Okay.
Yeah, they've been waking up a little here and there. One of them was crawling around before, but this is, the daytime. They, for the most part, want to sleep. They'll wake up occasionally because they get fed in the morning and the evening, because that's what the rehab center. But yeah, they're pretty sleepy during the day. I'm sure they're chattering up a storm and bothering each other all night.
I'm here for 4-H for volunteer. Is there any way I can?
What's up?
I'm here from 4-H to volunteer.
Okay.
So is there any way I can help?
That would be a question for my friend in the closet.
We are going to be starting to break down all of our setups up there. So just find someone who's trying to fold up tables, because that's what we have to do. Half the tables are going to have to be folded and returned into the library, and we're going to have to gather the chairs as well. So check outside. It's going to be a little heavy lifting.
Is there a bathroom down here?
Yes, actually, it's right behind where the vending machines are.
Okay.
And this is all my stuff here.
Yes, my stuff is right here. I'm gonna just make sure no one comes in and steals my friends.
I will be right here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bud. Time to get ready to go home. You were very popular. You did a very good job.
Yes, they certainly were.
And of course, thank you for having me.
Oh, please, this was great. This was so great, really was.
Okay.
Got everything?
Yep, is that secure? Yes, it is.
Okay, you're good to go then. Thank you.
Thank you.